86 of my soldiers are going to die because you people keep sending me ghost stories instead of ammunition." Commander Caldwell slammed the radio down. Then someone knocked on the blast door. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. His sergeant opened it and stepped back without a word. A middle-aged woman stood in the snow with a battered rifle case at her feet and blood on her sleeve. She looked past both of them at the eastern ridge and said without raising her voice, "Your mortar commander moves to firing position in 22 minutes. Your medical station dies first. Give me 3 rounds and I will end this siege before sunrise." Caldwell laughed. He would never laugh like that again. Subscribe to this channel, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The blast door had not been opened in 31 hours. That was the rule. Commander Ethan Caldwell had given that order himself, standing in the center of the command post, with blood still drying on his left sleeve from a shrapnel graze he hadn't told anyone about. Nothing goes in. Nothing comes out. Not until the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, arrived with ammunition, medical supplies, and the air cover that should have been there 48 hours ago and wasn't. He'd said those words flatly. The way a man speaks when he has already considered every other option and eliminated them one by one. Master Sergeant Lucas Bennett had nodded without asking questions. That was the thing about Bennett. 15 years of working in special operations had burned away all the unnecessary words. He simply nodded, turned, and went to relay the order to the 4 soldiers standing watch at the door. That had been 31 hours ago. Now Bennett was standing directly in front of Caldwell's field desk, and the expression on his face was something Caldwell had not seen in over a decade of working alongside the man. Uncertainty. "Sir." Bennett set his hands flat on the desk. "Someone is outside." Caldwell did not look up from the satellite image spread across the desk. "Define someone." "A woman, sir." That made him look up. Bennett's jaw was set in that particular way it got when he was trying to report something absurd without letting the absurdity show on his face. He was failing. "A woman," Caldwell repeated. "Mid-40s, maybe older, hard to tell. She's on foot. No vehicle that we can see on any of the perimeter feeds. She came up the northern approach which—" Bennett stopped, started again. "Which is not passable, sir. We've had it locked down since the first night because the enemy controls the ridge above it. Nobody walks that path without getting shot." And yet, Bennett agreed. Caldwell pushed back from the desk and rolled his neck until it cracked. 48 hours of almost no sleep lived in that sound. "What does she want?" "Entry, sir?" "Entry." He repeated the word the way a man repeats something he's heard correctly but refuses to accept. "She walked through enemy territory, through a route we have classified as unsurvivable, knocked on the blast door of a besieged military outpost, and she wants entry. She also said something else, sir." Bennett paused. "She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'Tell your commander I know what happened at the Eastern Ridge 6 minutes ago. Tell him I also know what's going to happen to his medical station before sunrise. And tell him if he wastes another 4 minutes deciding whether to let me in, the window closes.'" The Eastern Ridge. Caldwell felt something move through his chest. Not fear, he'd moved past fear about 18 hours ago. Something colder than fear. Something more precise. 6 minutes ago, 3 enemy positions on the Eastern Ridge had gone completely silent. No radio traffic. No movement on the thermal imaging. No gunfire. They had simply stopped. His communications sergeant, a 24-year-old named Torres, who had been awake for 2 straight days running surveillance, had flagged it as a potential tactical shift. A repositioning. Maybe a feint before a larger push. Nobody outside the command post knew about it. The information hadn't been transmitted. There were no outgoing communications from Fort Raven Ridge that could have carried that detail to anyone. Caldwell walked to the blast door himself. She was shorter than he expected. That was the first thing he registered, which immediately told him something about his own assumptions, because he hadn't known he was expecting anything. She had the kind of face that had been weathered rather than aged. Dark hair pulled back so severely it looked almost military. though she wasn't in any uniform he recognized. She was wearing civilian cold-weather gear, layered and practical, and she was carrying a rifle case that looked older than some of his soldiers. Battered hard-shell case, the kind that had been repaired more than once. There was a long cut along her left forearm, recent, maybe an hour old, that had been field-wrapped with a torn piece of fabric. She hadn't bothered to clean it first. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a problem they have already solved. Patient, slightly impatient with the delay. "Commander Caldwell," she said. Not a question. "That's correct." He crossed his arms. "Who are you?" "Maya Cross." He waited to see if the name would land. Watched her face to see if she was waiting for a reaction. She wasn't. "Should that mean something to me?" he said. "Probably not." She said it without offense. "May I come in? You can tell me right now, standing where you are, how you know about the Eastern Ridge, and how you got through that northern approach without getting killed." Maya set the rifle case down at her feet. Not with the careful reverence of someone placing something precious, with the easy confidence of someone setting down something that belongs to them and will be picked up again shortly. "The Eastern Ridge went quiet because I made it quiet," she said. 3 positions. I came up through the northern approach because the enemy rotates their pattern on that slope on a 40-minute cycle. The turn happens between 0200 and 0240. They've been doing it since the second night. Your surveillance has the footage. You haven't looked at it the right way." Caldwell stared at her. He was aware of Bennett standing 6 inches behind his left shoulder. He was aware of the 4 soldiers at the door. He was aware of every sound coming through the walls of the outpost. And he was aware that this woman had just described in 30 seconds an enemy movement pattern that his entire intelligence team had failed to identify in 2 days. "That's a significant claim," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You could be an asset, sent here with good information to build trust before feeding us bad intelligence." "I could be," she said simply. "You'll have to decide that. But I'd decide quickly because your eastern approach is being reestablished right now, and you have less than 4 hours before they move on your medical station." "How do you know they're targeting the medical station?" "Because that's what I would do." She said it without blinking. "Take out the wounded first. Eliminate the soldiers who can't fight back. Destroy the medical capacity so the remaining troops know that any injury becomes fatal. It's not creative. It's effective. And the commander on that ridge has done it before." The cold thing moved through Caldwell's chest again. He stepped back from the doorway. "Bring her in," he said. The command post was not large. 6 field desks, a bank of communications equipment, 3 laptop screens running surveillance feeds, 1 large tactical map on the wall covered in handwritten notations and dried coffee stains. It smelled like unwashed men and too much instant coffee and the particular metallic edge of sustained stress. Maya Cross walked into it and immediately walked to the tactical map. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for an introduction. She looked at the map for approximately 30 seconds, her eyes moving in a pattern that wasn't random, systematic left to right, ridge to valley high ground, to approach routes. Then she picked up a grease pencil from the desk without asking and drew a single circle on the eastern side of the map. "Here," she said. Caldwell looked at the circle, then at her. "What is that?" "The position your enemy commander is using as his command point. He's been there since last night." She drew a second mark. "His mortar team is staged here. They'll move to firing position approximately 30 minutes before first light." A third mark. "This is where they'll target." The third mark landed directly on the symbol for the medical station. Behind Caldwell Torres, the communications sergeant made a sound that wasn't quite words. Caldwell turned to look at the young sergeant. Torres was staring at the map with his mouth slightly open. "Torres," Caldwell said. "Sir?" Torres seemed to shake himself back to attention. "Sir, that the second position she marked. I've been watching a heat signature on thermal feed 3 for about 6 hours. I thought it was a cooking fire. I flagged it as low priority because the movement pattern looked too stationary for a weapons team. He looked at Maya. That's the exact location. Silence in the command post. Caldwell watched his soldiers. He watched their faces as the math completed itself. A woman they had never heard of had walked through enemy territory, taken out 3 positions they hadn't even known she was going to take out, and had just mapped their enemy's attack plan with a grease pencil in less than a minute. Sergeant First Class Derek Okafor, who had been running base security for the past 2 days on almost no sleep, spoke first. "How do you know all of this?" His voice wasn't hostile. It was the voice of a man who genuinely needed the answer. "Who are you?" Maya set the grease pencil down. 11 years in the Navy, she said. Last 3 as a sniper attached to SEAL Team 6 advisory operations. After that, independent contract work, mostly situations like this one. She paused. "I know about this base because I've been watching the enemy forces surrounding it for the past 6 days. I came in when the window opened." 6 days, Okafor repeated. "They've been planning this for longer than you've been here," Maya said. "This isn't a reaction to your presence. This was designed before you arrived. The rescue mission that brought you here, it was expected." The weight of that statement dropped into the room, and nobody spoke for a moment. Caldwell folded his arms and looked at her steadily. He was a man who had spent 30 years reading people in high-stress environments. He had developed a very precise internal calibration for distinguishing between someone who believed what they were saying and someone who was performing belief. Maya Cross was not performing anything. She was simply reporting. "All right," he said finally. "Say I accept your assessment. What are you proposing?" She turned back to the map. 3 shots, she said. Their communications officer, their mortar commander, and their field commander. Remove those 3, and the attack structure collapses. These forces don't have a succession plan below the command tier. It's a structural weakness I identified on day 2. 3 shots, Caldwell said. 3, she confirmed. He looked at the map. He looked at the 3 marked positions. He looked at the distances involved, the mountain valley between the outpost and the ridge, the elevation differentials, the wind conditions he'd been tracking for 2 days, because wind was the thing that killed communications equipment and made helicopter approaches impossible. "The range on those positions," he said slowly, "is beyond 800 meters on 2 of them. The third one," he pointed to the enemy command position she'd marked. "That's well over 1,000 meters, and that's assuming the target is stationary, which he won't be, and assuming conditions hold, which they won't." "Correct on all points," Maya said. "You're telling me you can make those shots." She looked at him directly. "I'm telling you those are the 3 shots that need to be made." It was a very precise answer. Caldwell noticed it was not quite the same answer as the question he'd asked. Okafor caught it too. He shifted. "Ma'am, with respect, there's a difference between identifying what needs to happen and being capable of making it happen." Maya turned to look at him. Something passed through her expression, not offense, not dismissiveness, something more complicated than either. "You're right," she said quietly. "There is." And she didn't say anything else. "Jaru." Caldwell ordered his team to pull the last 72 hours of surveillance footage. What they found changed the temperature in the room. Torres ran the thermal imaging side by side with the standard optical feed overlaying them the way Maya had suggested. The enemy movement pattern on the northern slope, the rotation Caldwell's team had catalogued but not analyzed deeply enough, revealed itself with sudden, almost embarrassing clarity. 40 minutes. Exactly. Consistent across every cycle they could trace. And at the lowest point of each rotation, there was a gap. A 6-minute window where the northern approach was unwatched from above. Someone had studied that gap. Someone had timed it. Torres rewound further. Found the moment 3 hours earlier when the 3 eastern ridge positions went silent. Zoomed into the optical feed. The footage was grainy, night vision quality. But it was there. 3 positions. 3 pauses in enemy activity, each lasting less than 60 seconds. each immediately after a brief disturbance, a movement at the ridgeline barely visible, just a shift in the shadows that could have been the wind. Except the wind had been coming from the east that night, not the ridge. Torres sat back in his chair, turned and looked at Maya, who was standing to one side of the room with her coffee going cold in her hands. "You," Torres said. It wasn't an accusation. It was something closer to awe. "Before I came in," she said simply, those positions had been pinning us for 6 hours." Okafor said, his voice lower than it had been. "We lost 2 men trying to take them out on the first day." Maya said nothing. The silence wasn't casual. It was weighted. It carried something. Caldwell watched her. He was trying to locate the thing that was bothering him. Not doubt about her skill, the footage had settled that. Something else. Something about the way she held herself when the conversation turned to casualties. He filed it. And Private First Class Ryan Holt was 22 years old and had been in the Army for 13 months. He had been assigned to communications support, which meant he was currently sitting in the corner of the command post running a radio that wasn't reaching anybody. He had a photograph of his sister in his left breast pocket. He had not told anyone about the photograph because he didn't want anyone to ask about it when he had been very careful to keep the word in the when column rather than the if column when they got out. He looked at Maya Cross the way young soldiers sometimes looked at senior soldiers who carried something they hadn't yet learned to name. "Ma'am," he said. His voice came out younger than he intended. Maya looked at him. "Have you done this before? This kind of situation?" The question was too broad and too honest to answer cleanly, and everyone in the room knew it. But Maya seemed to understand what he was actually asking. "Yes," she said. Holt nodded, swallowed. "Did it?" He stopped. "Most of them made it home," Maya said quietly. "That's all I can tell you. Most of them." Holt nodded again. He pressed his hand briefly against his left breast pocket and then moved it away. Caldwell watched the exchange and felt something shift in his assessment, not of Maya's capability, of who she was. He turned back to the tactical map. "Walk me through exactly what you need," he said. "And then we're going to talk about positioning. Because if you think I'm going to authorize you to set up in an exposed location without an extraction plan..." "I need 3 rounds," Maya said. "Consistent with my rifle's calibration. I have my own ammunition, but the load is specific to elevation and temperature conditions I calculated 12 hours ago. Conditions have shifted slightly. I need your technical sergeant to verify my calculations. That's it, 3 rounds. And access to the ridge observation post on the southern corner." She pointed to the map. "Here." Caldwell looked at the point she indicated. He looked at her. He looked back at the map. "That position," he said carefully, "is exposed on 3 sides. If the enemy realizes what you're doing..." "They will," she said. The room went very quiet. "I need your soldiers thinking about their defensive line," Maya continued. "Not about me. If your people are focused on their positions and their sectors, the enemy has to make a choice: continue the original attack plan or redirect to deal with a threat they didn't account for. Either choice costs them time. Time costs them the window for the medical station." "You're describing yourself as bait," Okafor said flatly. "I'm describing myself as a distraction with a purpose," Maya said. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. 30 years of combat experience. He had known men who were brave. He had known men who were reckless. He had known the few, the very few who occupied the space between those two things, who understood precisely what they were choosing and chose it anyway, not from the adrenaline of the moment, but from something quieter and harder and more durable. He was looking at one of them now. He didn't laugh. He hadn't laughed since she'd said the words about the medical station. But standing there looking at the tactical map and the 3 marks she'd made with a grease pencil, he became completely aware of something he should have registered at the blast door. He hadn't been the one deciding whether to let her in. She had been deciding whether to let him help. "Get me Private Torres," Caldwell said, And somebody find her whatever hot food we have left. He turned to Maya. You'll eat first. Then you'll walk me through the full trajectory analysis. I want to understand every decision point before first light. Something moved in Maya's expression. Small. Almost invisible. Thank you, she said. It wasn't gratitude for the food. He understood that. The hours before dawn moved, the way hours always moved inside a besieged position, not slowly but strangely. Time stretched and compressed in ways that had nothing to do with clocks. Caldwell had learned years ago that the psychological distortion was physiological, a product of sustained adrenaline and sleep deprivation. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to navigate. He worked through the trajectory analysis with Maya for 90 minutes. What he learned in those 90 minutes rearranged his understanding of what he was dealing with. She didn't just know sniper craft. She knew the specific physics of this terrain, this altitude, these wind patterns. She had been building a mental model of this battlefield for 6 days from the outside, and the model was more detailed than anything his own intelligence assets had produced from the inside. She knew the enemy commander's name. Hadid. She knew his rank, his background, his operational history in the region. She knew his tendency to position his mortar teams on the northern face of ridgelines rather than the southern, because a bad experience with cross-valley counter-battery fire had made him overcautious about southern exposure. She knew the specific call signs his radio operators used when shifting to attack posture. Torres confirmed them against the signals intelligence they'd been collecting. Every detail checked out. Caldwell sat back in his chair and looked at her across the field desk. How long have you been doing this independently? He said. 4 years. Since leaving the Navy? Yes. Why? He asked it simply, not as a challenge, as a genuine question. Maya was quiet for a moment. Her hands were wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold again. She kept forgetting to drink it. He noticed she'd done that with the first cup too. Because the situations don't stop happening just because the official structures decide they're done, she said finally. It wasn't the whole answer, he could tell that. But it was the answer she was giving him, and he decided not to push. He looked at the tactical map, the 3 marks, the outpost symbol, the 86 human beings sleeping in shifts across the facility. I have a sergeant, he said carefully. Okafor. He's going to want to go with you to that position. I work alone. I know. That's why I'm not making it an order. I'm telling you that a man under my command is going to want to be there with you, and I need you to understand why before you refuse. Maya looked at him. Caldwell leaned forward. Because he lost 2 friends on the first day, and watching a woman walk to an exposed position alone is going to cost him something he can't afford to lose before this is over. Something shifted in Maya's eyes, something he couldn't fully read. He can come to the secondary observation point, she said at last. 15 meters south of my position. He does not approach unless I call for him. Agreed. At 0340, Torres came to the desk and bent close to Caldwell's ear. Sir, he said. His voice was so low it was barely air. The heat signatures on the mortar position are moving. Caldwell was on his feet before the sentence finished. He turned to Maya. She was already standing, already picking up the rifle case, already looking at him with the same patient, slightly impatient expression she'd had at the blast door. Earlier than I calculated, she said. Hadid moved up his timeline. By how much? 90 minutes. She considered this for a moment. He's nervous. Something made him nervous. What would make him nervous? Okafor asked from across the room. Maya looked toward the eastern wall, toward the ridge, toward whatever was happening out there in the dark. The eastern position's going quiet, she said slowly. He's been waiting for a status report from those 3 teams. When it didn't come, she paused. He's not sure if it's a communication failure or a threat. He's moving because he doesn't know what changed. She turned back to Caldwell. "We have less time than I thought," she said. Okafor was already moving toward his gear. Torres was already on the radio trying to reach the perimeter teams. Around the command post, soldiers who had been sleeping in 2-hour increments were waking up reading the change in the room's energy, the way soldiers learn to read such things. Maya picked up the rifle case and looked at Caldwell one more time. "When it starts," she said, "hold your defensive positions regardless of what happens on that ridge. Your people need to trust their sectors." "They will," he said. She nodded once. She moved to the blast door. Okafor fell in 4 steps behind her. Caldwell watched them go. He looked at the tactical map. He looked at the 3 marks she'd made with a grease pencil. He thought about the word legend, the way he'd used it when Bennett first brought the information to him. The slightly dismissive, slightly amused quality of it. The way it had meant a story people tell when they need something to believe in. He thought about 86 soldiers. He thought about a woman who had spent 6 days alone in enemy territory studying a battlefield so she could walk into a besieged outpost and say, "I know what's going to happen, and I can stop it." He pressed his radio. "All stations, this is Caldwell. Stand by. We are approaching a critical window. Trust your positions. Trust your training. Do not break sector for any reason." He paused. "We are not alone on this fight anymore." He released the radio. Outside in the dark before dawn on a mountain ridge in northern Afghanistan, Maya Cross was already moving into position, and somewhere on the eastern ridge, a man named Hadid was about to discover that the thing making him nervous wasn't a communication failure, it was a reckoning. Okafor had seen a lot of things in 15 years of special operations. He had seen men walk into buildings that were on fire. He had seen a combat medic perform surgery on himself with a field kit and a piece of paracord. He had seen soldiers do things under pressure that defied every reasonable expectation of what a human body and a human mind could sustain. He had never seen anything like what Maya Cross did in the 12 minutes it took them to move from the blast door to the southern observation post. She didn't move fast. That was the first thing that surprised him. He had expected urgency. The timeline had compressed. Hadid was moving early, and every second between now and first light was a second the mortar team was getting closer to firing position. But Maya moved with a steadiness that was almost meditative, deliberate. Every footfall placed exactly where she intended it, every pause timed to something he couldn't see or hear, but clearly she could. She stopped once, held up a fist. Okafor froze behind her. 30 seconds of absolute stillness. Then she moved again. He would ask her about it later. She would tell him, there was a pattern change in the sound from the eastern ridge. I needed to recalculate. He would nod as though that made complete sense. It would take him another hour to understand what she meant, that she wasn't just navigating the physical terrain between the blast door and the observation post. She was navigating a battlefield she had mapped so completely inside her own mind that the map and the reality had become the same thing. When they reached the secondary observation point, 15 meters south of her intended position, as she had specified, she turned to look at him. "Stay below the sight line of the ridge," she said. "If they acquire this position, your job is to relay my status to Commander Caldwell. Nothing else." "Understood," Okafor said. He paused. "For the record, ma'am, I think what you're doing—" "Don't," she said, not unkindly. He stopped. "If you tell me it's brave," she said quietly, "I'll spend the next 30 minutes thinking about whether it is. I need to spend those 30 minutes thinking about wind drift and trigger pressure." She looked at him steadily. "Okay." Okafor looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. She turned and moved to her position. He settled behind the concrete barrier of the observation point, pressed his radio, and gave Caldwell the confirmation. 2 words, "in position." Then he watched, and in the watching, in the stillness of those dark pre-dawn minutes, Okafor started to understand something that had been nagging at him since Maya walked into the command post. It wasn't about skill. The skill was obvious. It wasn't about courage, though that was obvious too. It was about the way she carried herself when nobody was testing her. Most operators, even the best ones, carried a certain awareness of their own performance. Not ego necessarily, just the professionals' relationship to their own competence. The knowledge that they were good at this, the quiet hum of that knowledge running underneath everything else. Maya didn't have that hum. She had something else, something heavier, something that looked from the outside like absolute focus, but felt when you were close enough to sense it, like a woman who was performing a function she believed she owed. He thought about that the whole time she was setting up. Back in the command post, Caldwell was dealing with a different problem. Lieutenant Aaron Marsh had been the second-ranking officer at Fort Raven Ridge since the beginning of the siege. He was 31 years old, West Point trained, and possessed of the particular conviction that sometimes develops in intelligent men who have not yet been surprised by the world enough times to become humble. He had been asleep or attempting sleep during Maya's arrival and the subsequent trajectory briefing. He had woken up 20 minutes ago to find his base in a state of controlled high alert, and the explanation as delivered by Torres had done nothing good for his blood pressure. He was now standing in front of Caldwell's field desk with his arms crossed. "Sir," he said, "with all due respect, Aaron." Caldwell's voice was not harsh, but it was absolute. "I am going to stop you there, sir. We have a civilian, an unvetted individual, in an unsecured observation position with what may be the only 3 viable rounds remaining for long-range interdiction, and we are basing our entire defensive response on her assessment. Her assessment has checked out against every piece of surveillance data we have in this facility," Caldwell said. "Torres ran the verification himself. Torres is 24 years old and has been awake for 48 hours. Torres is 24 years old, has been awake for 48 hours, and still managed to correctly identify 5 separate data points that corroborate everything she told us." Caldwell stood up from the desk, not aggressively, simply fully, the way a man stands when he wants his full height in the conversation. "I need you to hear me clearly, Lieutenant. We do not have a better option. We have not had a better option for 48 hours. What we have right now is a woman who has been watching this enemy for 6 days and is currently sitting in a position that could get her killed in order to protect this base. I need your head in your sector." Marsh's jaw tightened. "Sir, what's your sector, Lieutenant?" A pause. "Northern perimeter, sir." "Then that is where I need your head." Caldwell held his gaze. "Go." Marsh went. Torres, who had been very carefully looking at his screens throughout the exchange, exhaled slowly after the lieutenant left. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Caldwell sat back down and pressed his hands flat on the field desk. The truth was, and he wouldn't say this to anyone, would not say it under any circumstances, because a commander's doubts were his own private territory. The truth was that a part of him understood Marsh's concern. Not because of Maya's competence. He had made his call on that. He was confident in it. But because of what confidence in Maya's plan actually required of him. It required him to hold, to keep his soldiers on their defensive lines and not attempt any kind of proactive rescue if her position was compromised. It required him to treat her as a strategic asset rather than a human being in danger, which was exactly what she had asked him to do, and which was in 30 years of command one of the most difficult things he had ever been asked to agree to. He looked at the tactical map, at the 3 grease pencil marks. He thought about her voice when she'd said, "I'm describing myself as a distraction with a purpose." He thought about the footage of the 3 eastern positions going silent. He thought about the fact that she had done that before she even knocked on the door, before anyone knew she was there. She hadn't told them because she wanted credit. She'd done it because it needed to be done. He pressed his radio. "Torres, give me an update on the mortar team position." "Still moving, sir. They've covered about 30% of the distance to their estimated firing point. At current pace, they hit optimal range in..." Torres paused, running calculations. 42 minutes. "And first light?" 51 minutes, sir." Caldwell let out a slow breath. 42 minutes until the mortar team was in range. 51 minutes until dawn, when the assault would likely begin in full. 9 minutes between those 2 events. 9 minutes that represented the difference between his medical station surviving the opening salvo and not. He looked at the map. "Come on, Maya. he said quietly. He said it the way a person says something they didn't intend to say out loud. The room was quiet enough that Torres heard it. Torres very carefully did not look up from his screens. What Caldwell did not know, what no one in the command post knew, was that Maya Cross was not entirely alone on that ridge. She had company inside her own head. This happened every time. She had learned to expect it and to work around it the way a craftsman works around a flaw in the wood, not by ignoring it, not by pretending it wasn't there, but by understanding it well enough to plan for it. The voice was not literally a voice. It was more like a presence. A weight that settled behind her sternum whenever she got into position behind a scope in a situation that mattered. A weight that had a particular texture, a particular temperature that she had come to associate with one specific memory from 8 years ago. Kandahar Province. A joint operation with an Army Ranger unit. Bad intelligence about the location of a high-value target. Maya at 900 meters watching through her scope, making a call in 3 seconds with incomplete information. The shot she fired had been technically perfect. The information it was based on had been wrong. She never talked about what happened after that. Not to anyone. Not in the official debrief where she had given accurate and complete tactical information while leaving out the part that woke her up at 3 in the morning for years afterward. Not to the Navy counselor she'd seen twice before stopping. Not to Richard Hale, her former instructor, and more than he probably knew, the closest thing she had to a person who understood her. Almost not to Richard Hale. She had come close once. 6 months after leaving the Navy. She had driven to his house in Coronado, the small immaculate house a few blocks from the water where he'd lived since retiring, and sat in his kitchen while he made coffee, and she had gotten as far as saying, "There was a mission in Kandahar," before her throat had simply closed. Hale had looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup with those eyes that had seen too much of the world to be surprised by any of it, and said, "I know." He hadn't pushed. That was the thing about Hale. He never pushed. He had the patience of someone who understood that certain kinds of weight could only be set down when the person carrying them decided it was time, and that anything that looked like helping them set it down early was actually just transferring it to a different part of their spine. What he had said after a long quiet between them was this: "A sniper is not defined by the targets they eliminate. You know that. I taught you that. But you have to do something with the knowledge, or it just becomes a sentence you know how to say." She had left that afternoon without saying what she'd come to say. But something had shifted. The weight hadn't gotten lighter. It had become more familiar the way a chronic pain becomes familiar. Not smaller, but integrated. Something you knew how to move with, rather than something that surprised you every time. On the ridge now in the dark before dawn, Maya settled the rifle and felt the weight settle with her. Right behind the sternum, right where it always was. She breathed into it. She looked through the scope. The communications officer was the first target. His position was the closest 640 meters across the valley, slightly below her elevation, which meant compensating for the downward angle as well as the wind coming off the western face of the ridge. She had calculated this 7 hours ago, when the wind was running at 12 miles per hour. It was now running at 9, which changed the lateral drift by approximately 4 inches at this distance. 4 inches. 4 inches was the difference between a mission that succeeded and a mission that failed. She breathed, adjusted, breathed again. In her earpiece, the small tactical radio Caldwell had given her before she left the command post, Torres's voice came through barely above a whisper. "Maya, the mortar team just picked up pace. They may have received an order to move faster." "Copy," she said. "That puts their optimal range window at 36 minutes instead of 42. 6 minutes lost." The math shifted. She had planned on taking the 3 shots across a window of 12 to 15 minutes, enough time between shots for the enemy to start responding to the first, which would force their communications officer to transmit a status report which would reveal his exact location. With a compressed window, she needed to move faster, which meant less certainty on each shot. She accepted this, noted it, filed it in the part of her mind that was still calculating rather than executing. "Acknowledged," she said into the radio. Tell Commander Caldwell I am beginning my first shot in approximately 4 minutes. Tell him to hold his people. Yes, ma'am. Torres. Ma'am? She paused. How long have you been awake? A surprised silence. 53 hours, ma'am. After this is over, she said, sleep. Whatever debrief they want can wait. Another silence. When Torres spoke again, his voice had a different quality, younger somehow, more his actual age. Yes, ma'am, I will. She returned to the scope. 400 meters below, and to the south, she was aware of Okafor at his position. She couldn't see him, she didn't need to, and didn't want to. But she was aware of him, the way she was aware of the wind, the way she was aware of the weight behind her sternum. As a fact, she was incorporating into her understanding of this moment. He had tried to say something kind to her. She'd cut him off, and she hadn't apologized for it because the apology would have required more explanation than she had time for. But she understood what he'd been trying to do. He'd been trying to give her something before she went out there, a kind of human ballast against what was coming. She thought about that now, briefly. Then she set it aside. She put her eye to the scope. The communications officer was a middle-aged man in a tan jacket who was holding a radio handset and looking at something to his left. He was doing his job. He was probably someone's father. He was also right now the most important person on this battlefield, because he was the thread that held the entire enemy command structure together, and when that thread broke, the structure would start unraveling, and it would unravel fast. Maya had learned through the hardest possible teaching that the way to survive this part of the work was not to avoid the human reality of what she was doing. It was to hold it and the tactical reality simultaneously, to refuse to simplify in either direction, to not dehumanize the target because dehumanization made you careless, and to not lose the tactical reality in the human one because that made you useless. Both things were true at the same time. She held both things. She breathed. She fired. The sound crossed the valley a fraction of a second after the effect. In the enemy command area, the communications officer went down. Maya was already moving not physically, but mentally. Already inside the adjustment for the second shot. The mortar commander. 300 meters further. Different elevation, different wind pocket because the terrain shifted at that distance and created a secondary channel that ran almost perpendicular to the primary wind. In her earpiece, Torres's voice came through sharp and fast. Enemy radio traffic, just ma'am, it went chaotic. They're transmitting simultaneously on 3 channels. I can hear they don't know where it came from. Good. Chaos in their communications meant Hadid was reaching for his mortar commander to ask what was happening. The mortar commander would respond. That response would carry enough radio frequency data for Torres to confirm the exact position, not that she needed confirmation. She'd marked that position herself 5 days ago. Copy, she said. Second shot in 90 seconds. Mortar team is responding to the chaos, Torres said. They've slowed down. They'll speed up again in 2 minutes, she said, when Hadid restores command. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. She moved her scope to the second position. The mortar commander was a compact man who moved with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time. He was already looking toward his radio, already reaching, already reacting to the sudden silence from the communications officer in exactly the way a well-trained soldier would, which was to look at the problem, directly assess, and try to fix it. He would get 3 seconds of looking and assessing. Maya gave him 2. The second shot crossed 930 meters. Torres made a sound in the earpiece that was not a word. Status, Maya said. Second target is down. A pause. In the pause, she could hear him breathing. Ma'am, there the radio traffic just collapsed. They went from chaos to almost nothing. I've got 2 transmissions, and they're both asking where Hadid is, asking for orders. That means Hadid is moving, she said. He knows something systematic is happening. He's changing his position. That's how do you... Because he's a good commander, she said. Not a great one, but a good one. A great one would have changed his position the moment the communications officer went down. A good one waits until the pattern is clear. She was already adjusting, already calculating the new probability distribution for where Hadid would move. There were 3 logical fallback positions from his original location. She had identified all 3 days ago. She had ranked them by his probable preference based on his operational history. He'll move to the secondary rock formation on the northeast corner of his ridgeline. It gives him a covered position line of sight to his mortar team and a route to his fallback rally point if the attack collapses entirely. Can you still reach that position? 1,080 meters, uphill angle. Wind had shifted again in the last 4 minutes. She could feel it on her face, feel the temperature change that meant it was pulling from the north now rather than the west. The correction factor had just changed for the 3rd time in 40 minutes. Yes, she said. She did not add, I think. She had learned that I think was a thought for before you got into position, not after. After you committed or you didn't, and every shade of uncertainty lived in the space between those 2 options. She committed. She moved the scope to the northeast corner of Hadid's ridge. And there he was, moving fast, head down, doing exactly what she'd said he would do. A compact man in a dark coat who was currently more surprised by this situation than he had been by anything in years of operating in this terrain, because nothing in his experience had prepared him for the specific shape of what was happening to him. Maya found him in the scope, took 1 breath, began the 2nd breath, and then her position exploded. She was down before she understood what had happened. Not down unconscious. Down on the ground, her back against the concrete barrier of the observation post, her ears ringing with a frequency that compressed the world into a narrow band of sensation. Something had struck near her close enough that she'd felt the pressure wave before she heard the report. Okafor's voice came through the earpiece instantly. Contact Maya. I heard an impact at your position. Are you? I'm up, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Give me status. You took incoming from, I don't know, it was fast. Single shot high caliber. They must have a counter sniper team we didn't. They found the pattern from my first 2 shots, she said. She was moving back to position as she spoke. The rifle was still on the barrier. She'd kept her grip on it, even going down muscle memory, doing what training built. Her left arm had something wrong with it. Not broken, she could grip. But the impact had caught the edge of the barrier, and the barrier had caught her, and her left elbow was running hot in a way that meant the next few minutes were going to require overriding some strong signals from her nervous system. They have a counter sniper, yes. 1 shot. He'll recalibrate for the 2nd. Then you need to move. I need 45 seconds, she said. Keep Caldwell off the radio. Maya. Okafor. Her voice was quiet. Not sharp, not frightened, absolutely even. I need 45 seconds. A pause. 45 seconds, he said. She got back behind the scope. Hadid was still moving. He hadn't heard the incoming shot from his counter-sniper, or he had, and interpreted it as part of the general engagement and kept moving. He was approaching the rock formation now. 20 meters from cover. If he reached cover, she lost the shot. The rock formation was a position she could reach, but not from this angle and not with the wind shift. She would have to relocate entirely, which meant minutes she didn't have, which meant the mortar team would reach firing range, which meant the medical station. She stopped the cascade. Not helpful. Not now. She was in the scope. She had the target. She had the angle. Barely the margin was inside 10% of her theoretical limit on this rifle at this load, at this altitude, and she knew it. She had the wind data from 4 minutes ago, which was now suspect. She had the distance calculation from 2 hours ago, which the repositioning had just changed by approximately 30 meters. She had enough. She fired. The shot hit the edge of the rock formation. Not Hadid. The edge of the rock formation 3 feet to his left, and the impact sent him sideways. She could see it through the scope, staggered him, threw his movement off, and for 1 second, 1 second, he was exposed on all sides. She had already begun the follow-up adjustment. She fired again. Nothing. The bolt was empty. She had fired 3 rounds, and the result was 1 confirmed kill, 1 confirmed kill, and 1 miss that had staggered but not eliminated the 3rd target. In the earpiece, Torres's voice came through with a quality she had never heard from him before. Something raw. Maya. Mortar team just hit their firing position. They're setting up. I've got about 4 minutes before they're operational. She lowered the rifle. This was the moment. This was exactly the moment she had been dreading since she first calculated the shot sequence 6 days ago, when she'd run the numbers 20 different ways and arrived at the same uncomfortable conclusion every time: 3 shots, 3 targets, 0 margin. The mission worked if all 3 shots were clean. If any one of them wasn't, Hadid was down but not confirmed. He could be injured. He could be dead. He could be exactly alert enough to give the order that sent 4 rounds into the medical station in 4 minutes. She could not confirm from here. Her radio crackled. It was Caldwell this time, not Torres. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it. Maya, I need a status report. She picked up the radio. 2 confirmed. 3rd shot struck the target area, but I cannot confirm status. A silence that lasted approximately 2 seconds and felt much longer. What's your assessment? Caldwell said. He may be down, she said. He may not be. I cannot tell you which from here, and I cannot retake the position in time to find out. Another silence. What do you need? He said. She looked at her rifle. She looked at her left arm, which was shaking slightly, not from fear from the impact from the physiological cascade of the last 8 minutes. She could feel that her hands were not at the steadiness she needed for a shot at this distance in these conditions. She had used them well. She had used them at the limit of what they were capable of right now. She thought about Kandahar. She thought about Hale's voice. You don't honor the lost by destroying yourself. You honor them by protecting the ones still in front of you. She pressed the radio. I need someone to hold the rifle, she said. The words cost her something. She heard it in her own voice. She had been doing this alone for 4 years. Before that, she had been doing it alongside teams, but ultimately arriving at the moment of decision, in the space between her eye and the scope, which was the most solitary space on Earth. The request, I need someone, was not easy to make, but it was honest, and right now, honest was all she had. Caldwell's voice came back without hesitation. Okafor is 15 meters from you. I know, she said. He's the steadiest hands we have. I know, she said again. She looked toward Okafor's position. He was already moving to her. Not running. Moving the way she had moved from the blast door, deliberate placed reading the ground. He had heard the exchange. He had heard everything. He reached her and crouched beside the barrier. He looked at her left arm first, then at her face. His expression was not pity, it was not awe, it was the face of someone who had identified a problem and was ready to address it. Tell me what you need, he said. She looked at him. She thought about how long it had been since she had said that sentence out loud to anyone and had someone respond with those specific words in that specific tone. Ready. No questions. No hesitation. I need you to create a stable platform, she said. My left arm took an impact. I can sight. I cannot hold the rifle steady enough for this distance with the current conditions. He nodded, didn't say anything unnecessary, positioned himself against the barrier shoulder against concrete, and brought his arms up in the configuration she indicated. A human bipod, improvised imperfect, the best available option. She settled the rifle. The scope came back up. In the earpiece, Maya, Torres's voice. 3 minutes. She found the rock formation, swept it. Left quadrant to right quadrant, slow, methodical. Ignoring the fact that 3 minutes from now the mortar team was operational and that every second she was looking through this scope was a second the enemy counter-sniper was recalibrating his own position. Then she found Hadid, not dead. Injured, she could see it in the way he was moving, one arm held close to his body, movements compromised, but upright, and reaching for a radio. 3 minutes. One shot. Her left arm was not what she needed it to be. She had Okafor, and something she had not given herself in 8 years. She had released the guilt just enough. Not all of it. Maybe never all of it. But enough. Enough to make her hands steady around what mattered rather than tight around what was already gone. She breathed. Okafor held still. He held so still, it was almost like he had stopped breathing with her. She found the exhale. She found the stillness inside it. She fired. The shot crossed the valley in the last second of darkness before dawn. In the earpiece, Torres said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "He's down." Okafor let out a breath that had been in him for a long time. Maya kept the rifle in position, scope on target, making absolutely certain. The mortar team she knew had lost their command authorization. Without Hadid's order, the team commander would not fire on the medical station, not because he was merciful, but because these forces had a strict authorization protocol, and a self-initiated attack on a protected site without a direct order carried a consequence worse than the mission failing. She had found that detail on day 3. She had built the entire shot sequence around it. She lowered the rifle. She looked at Okafor. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had just watched something he did not have adequate words for. Not because it was unfamiliar, he was an experienced soldier, but because this particular version of it, the specific shape of what Maya Cross did and who she was while she was doing it, had no template in his experience. "Are you going to say something?" she said. He considered it for a moment. "No," he said. She almost smiled. Okafor pressed his radio. "Command, this is Okafor. Third target is confirmed. Mortar team is static. Recommend you hold defensive positions and give me a sit rep on the medical station." Caldwell's voice came back immediately. "Medical station secure. Perimeter is holding. We're getting Torres is picking up the enemy radio traffic changing pattern. They're..." A pause. A short one. "They're going to ground. Pulling back from assault positions." A longer silence in the radio. Then, status on Maya Cross. Okafor looked at her. She was sitting against the concrete barrier with the rifle across her knees and her left arm cradled against her chest and her head back looking at the sky. The sky was beginning to change. First light was starting the faintest perceptible difference in the darkness above the ridgeline. Not yet dawn, but the promise of it. She was not looking at the ridge. She was not looking at the scope. She was just looking at the sky. Okafor pressed the radio. "She's okay, sir," he said. "She's okay." He wasn't sure that was exactly accurate, but it was true in all the ways that mattered right now. He sat beside her on the concrete and didn't say anything, because she had taught him in the last 45 minutes that the most useful thing you could offer another person in certain moments was simply to be present and quiet. First light came. The siege was not over yet. The enemy was withdrawing, but not gone. The rescue forces were still hours away. There were wounded to tend to and a defensive perimeter to maintain, and 86 soldiers who needed food rest, and the controlled, careful management of the adrenaline come-down that followed sustained crisis. But the mortar team had not fired. The medical station stood, and on a mountain ridge in northern Afghanistan, as dawn broke over the valley, Maya Cross closed her eyes and breathed like someone who had just set something down. Not permanently, but for now. The withdrawal wasn't clean. That was the first thing Caldwell understood when the radio traffic started changing shape at first light. A clean withdrawal sounded like silence units pulling back in coordinated sequence communications going quiet in the deliberate way of people executing a plan. What Torres was picking up was different. It was fragmented, urgent. The specific frequency pattern of a force that had lost its command structure and was reacting to that loss in real time. "They're not retreating on orders," Torres said. He had headphones pressed to both ears and his eyes were moving fast across his screens. "There, sir, I think they're scattering. Individual unit commanders making independent decisions. Some of them are pulling back. Some of them are holding position. And some of them—" He stopped. "Torres," Caldwell said. "Some of them are consolidating, sir. Eastern Ridgeline, Northern Sector. Maybe 30 to 40 fighters moving toward a single rally point." Caldwell looked at the tactical map. Northern Sector, Eastern Ridgeline. He put his finger on the map, found the point, felt the specific cold clarity of a man who has just understood something he didn't want to understand. "That's not a retreat," he said. "No, sir," Torres said quietly. "It's not. A fragmenting force with no central command was dangerous in a specific way that a coherent force with a clear strategy wasn't. It was unpredictable. Individual commanders running on autonomy and anger and the need to do something with the momentum they'd built over 2 days of siege, they didn't make rational tactical decisions. They made emotional ones. And emotional decisions in combat looked like one thing almost every time an attack designed not to achieve a strategic objective, but to make someone pay for what had just happened to their leadership. Hadid was down. His communications officer was down. His mortar commander was down. 40 fighters were consolidating on the eastern ridge, and Maya Cross was sitting in an exposed observation post on the southern corner with an injury she hadn't fully disclosed and an empty rifle. Caldwell pressed his radio before he finished the thought. "Okafor." Static. Then, "Sir." "What is Maya's current status, and can she move under her own power?" A pause that was slightly too long. "She can move, sir. Her left arm took impact from the blast barrier when the counter-sniper fired. She's been field dressing it. She hasn't asked for assistance." "Of course she hadn't." "I need you both back inside the perimeter in the next 10 minutes, Caldwell said. "We have a consolidation event on the eastern ridge, 40 plus. I need all assets inside the wire." Another pause. "Copy that, sir. We're moving." Caldwell turned from the radio. Marsh was standing across the command post with his arms still crossed and his jaw still set. But something had changed in his expression over the last hour. The opposition hadn't dissolved. Marsh wasn't the type for quick conversions, but it had become more complicated, more honest. "Lieutenant," Caldwell said, "I need your northern perimeter at full strength, right now." "Already ordered, sir." Marsh unfolded his arms. "I also need you to know that I've been running numbers on the consolidation. If they hit us from the eastern approach simultaneously with a feint from the north." "I've been running the same numbers," Caldwell said. "Then you know we're short on the eastern wall by 3 rifles. Yes." Caldwell was already moving toward the door. "Which is why we are about to have a conversation about what to do about that. Walk with me." Maya heard the instruction from Caldwell through the earpiece and did not immediately move. Not because she was ignoring the order, because her left arm had stiffened in the last 20 minutes in a way she'd expected, but had hoped to be wrong about, and standing up from the position she'd settled into against the barrier required a sequence of movements that she needed to plan before executing if she wanted to do it without making noise. She planned it, executed it, made noise anyway, a short, controlled exhale that Okafor heard. He was beside her in 2 steps. "I've got it," she said. "I know you do," he said. "I'm here anyway." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything else about it. They moved back toward the perimeter. The distance was the same as when they'd gone out, 80 meters broken terrain, same tactical hazards. It felt different in the growing light. Dawn had fully committed now, the sky shifting through the gray-blue band that preceded actual color, and the mountains around Fort Raven Ridge were emerging from the dark in their full scale for the first time since Maya had arrived. She noticed them, filed them, did not permit herself to linger. What she was aware of instead, what occupied the part of her attention that wasn't tracking their movement and their exposure and the sounds coming from the eastern ridge, was the weight. It was different now, not gone. She'd said not permanently to herself when she breathed out in the first light, and she'd meant it. The weight of Kandahar didn't lift because she made 3 good shots. That wasn't how it worked. She understood that better than most people understood anything about her. But it had shifted. The angle was different. It was still behind her sternum, still present, still real, but it felt less like something she was carrying and more like something she was living alongside. The distinction mattered to her, even if she couldn't have explained it cleanly to anyone else. She thought about Hale. He would have said something dry and specific about that distinction, the kind of observation that came packaged so efficiently that you didn't realize how much it had changed your thinking until 3 hours later. She needed to call him. She would when this was over. She had said that before: when this is over, I'll call, and sometimes it was true, and sometimes the aftermath of an operation swallowed the intention before it became action. This time, she would do it. She had made that specific promise to herself while Okafor held the rifle, and she breathed through the shot, and the promises made in moments like that were the ones she kept. They reached the blast door. Caldwell met them on the other side. He looked at Maya's left arm first, the way medical training makes people look assessing before greeting, and then looked at her face. "I need 5 minutes with you before you go to the medics," he said. "I'm not going to the medics," she said. He looked at her arm again. "It's soft tissue," she said. "Possibly minor fracture at the outer elbow. Nothing that affects function in the next 12 hours. "How do you know?" "Because I've done this before," she said, not sharply, simply. He accepted it the way he'd learned to accept things, Maya said, with the understanding that she was reporting, not arguing, and that her self-assessment was based on a sample size he didn't have access to. "Eastern Ridge," he said, walking her toward the command post. "I heard," she said. 40 fighters consolidating. What's your timeline estimate on their assault?" "I'm sure. 2 hours, maybe less if they're running on anger rather than planning." "They are," she said. "Hadid's second-in-command is a man named Karimi. He's been in Hadid's shadow for 3 years. He's competent, but not patient. He'll want to strike before his fighter's momentum drops." Caldwell pushed open the command post door. Torres looked up from his screens, saw Maya registered the arm, looked immediately back at his screens, in the way of someone who had already learned that Maya Cross did not want to be looked at when she was injured. "What do you know about Karimi?" Caldwell said. "Enough. He's aggressive. He compensates for tactical inexperience with force concentration. He'll come at you from one direction with everything he has, rather than executing a multi-axis approach. It's his pattern." She moved to the tactical map. Her right hand went to the grease pencil. Her left arm she held still at her side. "Here. He'll consolidate at this rally point, and he'll hit the eastern wall. He has enough fighters to overwhelm your eastern defensive line if he commits fully." "We know," Caldwell said. "We're short 3 rifles on that wall." "Then you need to reposition." She drew a bracket on the map. "Pull 2 from the northern perimeter and move them here. Northern is your lowest risk sector right now, because Karimi is consolidating east, not north, and he doesn't have the command authority to coordinate a multi-direction assault. He'll try one hard push." Marsh, standing to the side of the room with his arms crossed less aggressively than an hour ago, spoke up. "What if he surprises us? What if he's better than your assessment?" Maya turned to look at him. She considered the question. "If Karimi surprises me," she said, "then you'll need to adapt. That's true regardless of anything I tell you. I'm giving you the best probability model available. It's not certainty. Nothing is certainty." Marsh held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has recalibrated and is not going to announce that he's done so. "Northern perimeter," he said to one of his soldiers. "Reposition 2 to the eastern wall. I want it done in 8 minutes." He walked out. Okafor watched him go, then looked at Maya. "That's the first time I've seen him defer to a suggestion without debating it for 10 minutes. "He's not deferring," Maya said. "He's deciding. There's a difference." She went back to the map. Private First Class Ryan Holt found her 20 minutes later. He had been looking. Not in a way he'd announced to anyone. He'd simply been moving through the base on his assigned communications duties, and happened to route himself past the command post 3 times, until he saw her through the open door, standing at the map with a cup of coffee she was ignoring. He knocked on the doorframe. "Ma'am." She looked at him. "I heard it worked," he said. His voice was still younger than he wanted it to be. "Torres told me. All three. It worked." "It worked," she confirmed. He swallowed. There was something happening in his face, not quite tears, but close. The specific expression of a 22-year-old who has spent 2 days genuinely uncertain about whether he was going to see his sister again and has just received confirmation that the window of uncertainty has narrowed. "I wanted to..." He stopped, started again. "I wanted to say thank you. I know that's..." Another stop. "I know that probably doesn't mean much coming from me." Maya set down the coffee cup. She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at things she'd been trying not to think about directly. "Ryan," she said. He looked up. She'd used his first name. He hadn't expected that. "The photograph in your pocket," she said. "Who is it?" His hand went to his breast pocket automatically. "My sister, Emma. She's 17. "Tell me something about her." He blinked. Sorry." "Something real," she said. "Not what she does. Something she is." He stood there for a moment looking at her, and she looked back, and the command post was quiet enough that she could hear Torres in the corner adjusting a frequency. "She laughs before jokes are finished," Holt said at last, "like she gets it before the punchline. And then she laughs and it makes whoever's telling the joke lose track of it. And she knows she does it, and she doesn't stop doing it because she says life is too short to wait for punchlines." He stopped, looked slightly embarrassed. "That's what you meant." "That's what I meant," Maya said. He looked at his feet, back up at her. "Why did you want to know that?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I do this work," she said slowly, "and the mathematics of it are real range elevation wind trajectory. Those numbers are real and they matter, but they're not what I'm doing it for." She looked at him. "I'm doing it for Emma, who laughs before the punchline. I'm doing it for the actual people, not the numbers representing them. And sometimes I have to remind myself of the difference." Holt was quiet. He touched his pocket again. "Are you..." He hesitated. "Are you going to be okay after this?" Maya looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. She said it carefully, not reflexively, not to comfort him, with the specific intentionality of a person who has examined the statement and decided it is true. "Good," he said. He straightened slightly. "I'm going to tell Emma about you. When I get home, she'll want to know." He left. Maya looked at the door for a moment after he was gone. Then she picked up her coffee. She finally drank it. Nud. The radio call came 47 minutes after Okafor and Maya returned to the perimeter. It was not from Karimi. It was not from the enemy at all. Torres picked it up on a frequency that had been inactive since the siege began, a long-range communications band that Fort Raven Ridge had been using to attempt contact with the QRF before losing reliable transmission range on day 1. "Sir?" Torres pulled the headphones off one ear and turned. "Sir, I have traffic on the QRF band." Caldwell was across the room in 4 steps. "Who is it?" "Call sign Ironbridge, sir. That's..." Torres was already checking against the frequency list. "That's the 75th Ranger element attached to the Regional Response Force. They're..." His voice changed. "Sir, they're saying they're approximately 4 hours out. They're requesting a status update on Fort Raven Ridge." 4 hours. 4 hours was not a rescue. 4 hours was a planning horizon. It meant the cavalry was coming, but the cavalry was not here. And in 4 hours, a man named Karimi with 40 fighters and a grievance was going to hit the eastern wall. And the question of what the base looked like when Ironbridge arrived depended entirely on what happened in the gap between now and then. "Patch me through," Caldwell said. Torres handed him the handset. "Ironbridge. This is Raven Ridge Actual. We have been under siege for 52 hours. Current status: medical station intact. 86 personnel, combat effective or near effective, eastern perimeter at reduced strength. We are anticipating an assault from a consolidating enemy force on the eastern wall within approximately 90 minutes. He paused. We are requesting any available air assets to support. Over. The response came back with satellite delay, a voice that sounded like it had been awake as long as Torres. Raven Ridge Iron Bridge acknowledges. We have one air asset available, a rotary wing in your sector. Current ETA to your position is 2 hours 15 minutes. Can you hold over? 2 hours 15 minutes. 2 hours 15 versus 90 minutes. Caldwell didn't look at the map. He already knew what the map said. He did the math in his head without needing to look at anything. Iron Bridge we will hold. Out. He handed the handset back to Torres, turned around. Maya was watching him from the corner of the command post. She had heard everything. She looked at him with the same expression she'd had at the blast door patient, slightly impatient with the delay already calculating. 2:15 versus 90, she said. You have a 45-minute gap. Yes, he said. Karimi will hit the eastern wall the moment he thinks his fighter's momentum is at peak. If I'm right about his pattern, that's between 60 and 90 minutes from now. She pushed off the wall she'd been leaning against, which means the eastern wall has to hold on its own for approximately 45 minutes past the assault initiation before air support arrives. Also correct, Caldwell said. Your eastern wall, as repositioned by Marsh, has enough rifles to hold a concentrated single-axis assault for... She paused. The pause was not uncertainty, it was arithmetic. 20 to 25 minutes before ammunition and position become critical variables. The room was very quiet. So we have a problem, Caldwell said. We have a problem, she agreed. She was moving to the map. Her right hand went to the grease pencil again. Her left arm was held slightly away from her body. Now the stiffness was progressing. She was adapting to it. He could see her making micro adjustments that looked like nothing and were everything. The 45-minute gap, she said, closes if Karimi's attack loses coherence before it reaches peak momentum. If his fighters encounter resistance before the wall, not at the wall before their advance slows. 45 minutes becomes 30, maybe 25. She drew a line on the map, 40 meters east of the base perimeter. Here, if you can create a contact point here, Karimi's fighters have to deal with it before they reach the wall. It fragments their momentum, spreads their attention. Okafor, standing near the door, said it before Caldwell could. That position is outside the perimeter. Yes, Maya said. That means whoever goes there is outside the wire, Okafor said. Without the wall. Without... Yes, Maya said again. Another silence. Different from the previous silences. This one had weight of a different kind. Not the weight of the unknown, but the weight of something coming into focus that everyone in the room had already understood, but nobody had said yet. Caldwell looked at the map, at the line she'd drawn. You're talking about a forward harassment position. Suppression redirection delay, she said. 3 to 4 minutes of contact at that point, and Karimi's assault timeline extends by 8 to 10 minutes. Do it twice at 2 positions, and you've bought 15 to 20 minutes total. With what? Okafor said. Your rifle is empty. I have a sidearm, she said. And your base has grenades. The word dropped into the room cleanly. Okafor stared at her. You're talking about going outside the wire with a handgun and grenades to personally delay a 40-man assault. I'm talking about creating enough tactical uncertainty that Karimi's fighters slow down, she said. I am not talking about engaging 40 fighters in a direct exchange. Directional fragmentation at distance, then reposition. Repeat. It's not complicated, it's just uncomfortable. It's suicide, Okafor said flatly. Ma'am, with the greatest respect, it is suicide. You have one arm working at full function. I've already been outside the wire twice tonight, she said. I know the terrain. I know the approach routes. And I know that if Karimi hits your eastern wall at full momentum, those 20 soldiers cannot hold for 45 minutes and 86 people. She stopped, collected herself. 86 people who have already survived 2 days of this do not die 45 minutes before the rescue arrives. They don't. The room held the sentence. Torres had stopped looking at his screens. Marsh, who had returned from repositioning his soldiers and was standing near the door with his arms at his sides, was very still. Holt, who had come back to his communications station and was technically maintaining a signal watch, was looking at his boots. Caldwell was looking at Maya. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the tactical map when he first saw the 3 grease pencil marks, with the recognition of a man encountering something that exceeds his framework and requires him to build a new one. He was also looking at her the way he had not let himself look at anything in this command post for 52 hours, with the understanding that the people who solved impossible problems were not made of different material than everyone else. They were made of the same material, organized differently. And the organization was not something that happened to them. It was something they chose over and over in the moments when the choice was available and the alternative was clear. "No," he said. Maya looked at him. "Not alone," he said. "You go with Okafor and 2 volunteers. You set up 2 positions as you described. But you have a team, and you have an extraction route, and you do not engage past the timeline unless you hear from me directly." He held her gaze. "Those are the conditions. Non-negotiable." She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her weigh it, not calculating whether she could argue him out of it, but genuinely assessing whether the conditions changed the tactical viability. 2 volunteers with combat experience in close terrain, she said. "Not rotation soldiers. I need people who have been in contact in the last 12 hours. "Okafor picks them," Caldwell said. She looked at Okafor. Okafor was already looking at Marsh. Marsh looked back. Then he looked at Maya. Then he uncrossed his arms, which had been crossed for most of the last hour, and he said something that nobody in the room expected. "I'll go." The words came out quieter than his usual register. Not humble Marsh didn't do humble, but honest. The specific honesty of a man who has spent an hour reconsidering his assumptions and has arrived at a conclusion he's not going to dress up. Maya looked at him. "You have command responsibility for," she started. "My soldiers are positioned and ordered," Marsh said. "Okafor has the eastern wall. Torres has communications. The base has a functioning command structure that doesn't require me standing in this room." He looked at her directly. "And I have been in this command post for 52 hours telling my people to hold and trusting other people to do the things that needed doing outside these walls." His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm done with that." Maya held his gaze for 3 seconds. "Can you move quietly?" she said. "Yes." "Can you follow instruction without negotiation when we are in contact?" A pause. An honest one. "Yes." She turned to Caldwell. He read her face. He was getting better at reading her face. "Take Marsh," he said. "And pick your 4th. You have 12 minutes before you need to be in position." Maya nodded. She set down the grease pencil. She looked at the map one more time, not reviewing, not recalculating the way she sometimes looked at things before she committed to them fully. A last look that was also a kind of leave-taking. Then she turned toward the door. In the corner, Torres was watching her go. "Ma'am," he said. She paused. "The frequency they used to contact us," Torres said carefully. "Iron Bridge. I ran a secondary trace on the transmission." She turned to look at him. "It's clean," Torres said. "Legitimate QRF call sign right. Encryption protocols, right frequency pairs for the Regional Response Force." He paused. "But the route it came in on..." He looked at his screen, looked back at her. "It was routed through a relay station that we haven't been using. A backup relay that our unit decommissioned 18 months ago." The room temperature changed, not dramatically, not suddenly. The way room temperature changes when someone opens a window, and the air shifts, perceptible, significant, impossible to identify the exact moment it started. "What does that mean?" Marsh said. Torres said nothing. He looked at Maya. Maya was very still. "It means," she said slowly, "that either the QRF is using backup infrastructure because their primary is down, which is possible, Or someone sent us that transmission on a frequency they knew we would accept as legitimate. She looked at Torres. "Do you have the signal strength data? Running it now," Torres said. He typed, waited, read. The color in his face changed slightly. "Signal strength is inconsistent with the stated distance. If Ironbridge is 4 hours out, they're too close to the relay for this signal pattern. It reads like..." He stopped. "Like what?" Caldwell said. "Like a local transmission made to look like it came from a distance," Torres said. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Okafor said it, and said it the only way it could be said, flat, direct without softening. "Someone inside our communications range wants us to believe rescue is coming, wants us to relax our defensive posture." Nobody disputed it. Maya turned back to the tactical map. She looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she looked at Caldwell. "It changes the timeline," she said. "If Karimi sent that transmission, or someone working with him did, then he knows we received it. He knows we believe rescue is 4 hours out, which means he will not wait 90 minutes. She put her finger on the eastern wall position. "He will hit you in 30. The command post fractured into motion. Caldwell on the radio to Marsh's repositioned soldiers. Okafor moving to the blast door. Torres running verification protocols at a speed his exhausted hands barely managed. Holt pressing the long-range band, trying to raise a signal that might or might not be real. In the center of it, Maya Cross picked up her sidearm, checked it, holstered it, and looked at the door. 30 minutes. Outside the wire. One arm. She thought about Hale, about the specific thing he had said to her in that kitchen in Coronado with the coffee going cold between them, the thing she hadn't been able to hear fully at the time. "Use your skill to protect the people who still need you." She had heard it then as an instruction about sniper craft, standing in the command post of Fort Raven Ridge, with 30 minutes before Karimi's assault, and 86 lives on the wrong side of a 45-minute gap. She understood it differently. It wasn't about the rifle. It was about showing up, every time, in whatever form the showing up required. Whether that was lying still behind a scope for 6 days in enemy territory, or walking outside a perimeter with a sidearm and grenades, and a plan held together by the specific knowledge she had spent years building and hadn't been destroyed by and hadn't let destroy her. She had the knowledge. She had the will. She had currently 1 fully functioning arm and 3 people willing to go outside the wire with her. And she had 30 minutes. She walked to the door. "Let's go," she said. They went out through the secondary access point on the southeastern corner, a narrow passage that Okafor had identified on day 1 as the lowest profile exit from the base. Maya went first, Marsh behind her. 2 soldiers Okafor had selected in the 60 seconds between Caldwell's authorization and their departure. Corporal Diana Reyes, 26 combat engineer with 2 deployments, and the specific kind of calm that came from working with things that could kill you if you stopped paying attention. And Sergeant First Class James Tao, 33 former Ranger who had transferred to this unit 8 months ago and had not said a single unnecessary word since Maya arrived, which she considered a significant recommendation. 5 people. Outside the wire. 28 minutes before Karimi hit the eastern wall. Maya had given them the instructions in 90 seconds flat, while Okafor was selecting Reyes and Tao. No written plan, no diagrams. She had spoken, and they had listened, and she had watched their faces to see who was tracking and who was performing tracking, and all 4 of them had been genuinely tracking, which meant she didn't need to repeat herself. Position 1 was 40 meters east of the perimeter. Position 2 was 60 meters northeast, covering the approach angle that Karimi's consolidated fighters would use based on the terrain funnel between the ridge and the base. The goal was not to stop them. The goal was to make them slow down and look around, which was a different thing entirely and required a different kind of engagement. She had said, "We are not fighting them. We are confusing them. There is a difference." Tao had nodded without expression. Reyes had said, "How long do we engage before repositioning?" 90 seconds per position, Maya had said. Not 2 minutes, Not 1 minute and 45 seconds. 90 seconds, then we move regardless of contact status. Marsh had said nothing. He was already wearing his gear. That was good. That was exactly right. Now they were moving through the dark outside the wire, and the sounds of the base were falling behind them, and what was ahead was the kind of silence that wasn't silence. The specific absence of casual sound that meant a large number of people were moving carefully through terrain they didn't want to announce themselves in. Maya heard it before she could identify it. She raised her right fist. All four of them stopped. She stood still and listened with her whole body, not just her ears, but the pressure sense in her chest, the vibration through the soles of her boots, the particular quality of the air. Karimi had not waited 30 minutes. He had moved in 22. Inside the command post, Torres saw it first. The thermal imaging picked up the advance elements of Karimi's assault force at 0547, moving fast along the eastern approach, with a coherence that told Torres these were not the scattered fighters from the post-command chaos. Karimi had consolidated his best people for this. He'd spent 20 minutes pulling his most disciplined fighters out of the scatter and pointing them at the eastern wall in a wedge formation that was basic and brutal and effective. "Sir?" Torres's voice came out wrong. He heard it himself and corrected it. "Sir, I have the assault force on thermal. They're ahead of the timeline. Advance elements are..." He read the distance. "They're going to reach position 1 in 4 minutes. Caldwell pressed the radio. "Maya." Static. "Maya, respond." A pause that was 3 seconds and felt like 30. Then her voice came through low and controlled and slightly breathless in the specific way of someone who is moving fast while talking. "We see them. We're at position 1. We're early." "Confirmed," Caldwell said. "You have their advance elements in 4 minutes." "I know." A pause. "Tell Torres to watch position 2. If Karimi sent a flanking element north, it'll show on thermal in the next 60 seconds. Torres was already looking, scanning the northern sector thermal feed. Watching. The seconds stretched. Nothing. 63 seconds. Nothing. "No flanking element," Torres said into the radio. "Copy," Maya said. "He's committed everything to the eastern push. That means..." "He's expecting a quick breach," Caldwell finished. "Yes, which means if we slow him down enough at positions 1 and 2, he has no contingency. He either pushes through or he stops." A brief silence. "He will not stop." Maya. "I know," she said again. "We're ready." The radio went quiet. Caldwell stood in the center of the command post and looked at the thermal feed on Torres's screen and watched 40 fighters move toward the eastern wall of his base in a wedge formation, and thought about the 5 people he had sent outside the wire to stand between those 40 fighters and 86 soldiers. He had made a lot of decisions in 30 years of command. This one lived differently in his chest than most of them. Position 1 was a natural depression in the terrain that Maya had identified from the surveillance footage 3 days ago. 4 feet of cover adequate for a prone engagement, enough concealment for a standing withdrawal. She had chosen it because the approach angle gave her line of sight on the funnel point, the narrow passage between 2 rock formations that Karimi's advance elements would have to move through, while the depression itself was below the sight line of anyone moving along the primary approach route. She was prone. Tao was beside her on the right. Okafor was 2 meters to her left. Marsh and Reyes were set up 8 meters behind them at the withdrawal vector, which was their job. Maintain the exit watch, the rear pull the front element out at the 90-second mark. Maya's left arm was pressed against the ground, elbow forward, as a stabilizing point, which was not a position she would have chosen voluntarily. Because the impact damage made it an active problem, she was managing, rather than a passive support. She was managing it. She had been managing it for the last 40 minutes. The advance elements came through the funnel at 0551. She counted 7 fighters in the advance element, moving fast, confident. Nobody who expects to walk into opposition moves the way these 7 were moving, the posture of people executing a plan they believe is already working. She let them enter the funnel. She looked at Tao. He looked back. She held up 3 fingers. Counted down. The explosion of the first grenade tows from the right side directional, angled to push into the funnel rather than toward position. One was the most useful sound Maya had heard since she arrived at Fort Raven Ridge. Not because of the damage. Fragmentation at that range and that terrain against 7 fighters who were moving produced 2 definitive results and left the rest of the math uncertain. She wasn't calculating the damage. She was calculating the response. The response was exactly what she'd told Reyes and Marsh it would be 28 minutes ago in the command post. Karimi's advance element stopped. Broke right instinctively away from the blast. The fighters behind them, the next wave already committed to the funnel, ran into the stopped advance element, and the formation compressed. A compressed formation in a narrow funnel was the most useful target on a battlefield. She fired twice with the sidearm. Tau fired. Okafor fired once. Not rapid fire. Placed fire. The distinction was everything. Then she said clearly, and without raising her voice, "Move." They moved. 90 seconds had elapsed. The withdrawal to position 2 was 40 meters, and it was the most exposed 40 meters Maya had run in 4 years of doing this work. Her left arm did not like the movement. She was aware of it with every step in the specific way of someone who has taken an injury and is not allowing the injury to be the loudest thing in her awareness. The second loudest thing in her awareness was the radio. Caldwell's voice. "The main element is pressing the funnel. They slowed down. Torres has them pacing at half speed past the position you just vacated." "Copy," she said, running. "Time to eastern wall." 9 minutes. 9 minutes. They needed 15 before the timeline gap closed enough for the air asset to matter. 6 more minutes. She needed to find 6 more minutes. Position 2 was less cover than position 1. That had been in the original plan. The second position was always the harder one, the one chosen not for ideal conditions, but for approach, angle coverage, and post-engagement withdrawal accessibility. Maya had known this when she chose it 6 days ago from surveillance footage, and had accepted it then with the same arithmetic she applied to everything. She applied it again, now settling into a half-crouch behind a concrete drainage barrier that was adequate for her purpose, if her purpose was to be effective for 90 seconds and then leave. Marsh was on her left. He had been quiet since they left position 1 in a way that was different from his earlier quiet, not the quiet of a man performing deference, but the quiet of someone who was actually inside the work. She had noticed the shift and filed it. "You okay?" she said, quietly. They were in position and had approximately 90 seconds before the main element would be in range. Marsh looked at her. "Yes," he said. Then, "Better than I expected to be." She looked back toward the approach. "You've been in contact before." "Afghanistan 2019, he said. "Iraq before that." "Then you know this part." "I know the adrenaline part," he said. "This part is different." She glanced at him. "This part is calm," he said. "You're calm, and it changes the temperature of the whole thing, the way you are about this." He stopped. "I'm not saying this right." "You're saying it fine," she said. He looked at her. "How do you do it? This calm." She thought about Kandahar, about the weight behind her sternum, about 8 years of carrying it, about the moment in the dawn light when it shifted. "You decide what you're here for," she said. "Very clearly, not what you're afraid of, what you're here for, and then you do that thing." She looked toward the approach. "Here they come," she said. The main element came through the funnel faster than the advance element had. They had seen what happened to their advance, slowed down, took fire, compressed, and they had recalibrated. They were moving with their weapons up and their formations spread, and they were looking at the terrain instead of through it. Karimi had learned from position 1, which meant position 2 was harder. Maya had planned for this. She let the lead element clear the funnel, completely waited until they were fully committed to the open ground between the funnel exit and the eastern wall, and then she nodded to Reyes. Reyes, in her first word since they'd left the base, said, "Cooking," held the grenade for 2 seconds and threw it in a flat arc that carried it over the lead element and landed it directly in the funnel exit behind the main formation. Behind them, not in front. The lead element turned. Instinct. An explosion behind you is a threat to your rear and your escape route simultaneously, and the instinct to face it is nearly impossible to suppress even in highly trained soldiers. They turned. The formation pivoted. For 4 seconds, Karimi's lead element was facing the wrong direction. Tayo fired. Okafor fired. Maya fired 3 times with her right hand left arm held into her body, changing her firing stance on the fly in a way that cost her accuracy, but not enough accuracy to matter at this range against a pivoting formation. The lead element went to ground. Prone fighters in open ground were not pressing the eastern wall. 90, she said. Malko, Caldwell's radio. The lead element is down. I mean down prone, sir. They've gone to ground about 30 meters from the wall. The main body is it stopped. Sir, they stopped at the funnel exit. Torres ran the count. I'm seeing 6, maybe 7 out of action. The rest are... He looked at the thermal. They're not pressing. They're consolidating again. Caldwell exhaled through his teeth. How long? Before they press again, 2-3 minutes. Then they'll have figured out that what's hitting them is not a full defensive element and they'll push through. Torres looked at him. But sir, if they're taking 2 to 3 minutes to consolidate... That's our 6 minutes, Caldwell said. He pressed the radio. Maya extract. Now, get back to the perimeter. Static. Maya. Maya heard Caldwell's voice and she was already running. All 5 of them. Moving fast on the extraction route she'd memorized from the surveillance footage and walked once in her head before they left the base. The route that curved north before turning back west toward the secondary access point, putting a terrain feature between them and Karimi's main element for the most exposed portion of the run. Her left arm was on fire, not metaphorically. The specific bright, insistent signal of tissue that had been compressed and impacted and was now being asked to cooperate with a running motion. It was not interested in cooperating with. She was running with it held against her body, and the motion still jarred it with every step. And every jar produced a signal she routed around the way you route traffic around a closed road. It was there. It was real. She was not driving through it. Tayo was beside her. Marsh was 2 steps behind. Reyes was on their right, watching the flank with the automatic attention of someone whose job for the last 6 years had been thinking about what was in the space everyone else wasn't looking at. Okafor was running rear security, which meant he was running last, which meant he was the person closest to Karimi's fighters if those fighters started moving again before they reached the access point. He knew this. He had chosen this position. They were 20 meters from the access point when the radio in Maya's vest crackled. It was Torres. His voice had a quality it hadn't had in the previous transmissions, controlled, but barely. Maya, Karimi's element is moving. They figured out the size of your unit. They're pressing the approach at speed. I have... A pause. I have 6 fighters who broke off the main element and are moving north of your position. They're trying to cut the extraction route. 6 fighters, north of position, between them and the access point. 20 meters. 6 fighters between them and the only way back in. Maya did the math in the time it took her to take 3 steps. Okafor, she said into the radio. I heard, he said. I see them. They're going to reach the intercept point before we do. I know. Okafor, keep running, he said. His voice was not panicked. It was not heroic in the movie sense. It was the voice of a man who has done the math and accepted the answer and is moving toward it without flinching, which was exactly what Okafor had been doing for 15 years. He broke left. What happened in the next 40 seconds happened the way close-quarters engagements happened, which was to say, fast and ugly, and without the clarity that distance and scope provided. Okafor was not a sniper. He had never pretended to be. What he was a master sergeant who had spent 15 years getting very good at being in bad situations and making the best available decision in each second of those situations. He put himself between Karimi's 6 fighters and the extraction route. He engaged. Maya heard it behind her. She kept running. She had told herself going out that she would keep running if this happened, that breaking the extraction to turn back was the decision that got everyone killed, and not just the person in trouble. And she had believed it when she said it, and she believed it now, and it was the hardest thing she had done since Kandahar. Harder, actually, because Kandahar had been a mistake she'd made in real time. This was a decision she was making with full knowledge and full intention. She kept running. Reyes hit the access point first, Marsh 1 step behind, Tao and Maya through the gap. She turned. Her sidearm was up. Okafor came through the gap 4 seconds later. He was running at a quality of speed that said something had changed in the last 40 seconds. He came through the access point and passed Maya, and she grabbed his arm with her right hand, and they were both moving inside the wire before she understood he was hit. Not badly. She could tell that from the way he was moving, he was managing it the same way she was managing her arm routing around the signal. But he was hit upper left shoulder, and there was blood on his jacket in a pattern that meant he hadn't noticed it yet. "You're hit," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm okay." "You know." "I noticed it at the 4th step," he said. "I decided it wasn't relevant to the task." She looked at him. He looked back. "That's my line," she said. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The thing that happens before a smile when someone is in too much pain and too much adrenaline to actually get there. "I learned from someone," he said. Inside the command post, Torres had his eyes on the thermal feed and his hands on the radio, and his voice had found the specific flat register of a soldier reading a situation. He cannot change and must report accurately regardless. "Karimi's main element is at the eastern wall," he said. "They're pressing. Our soldiers are engaging." A pause. "Sir, they're holding. The eastern wall is holding." Caldwell had his radio in both hands. "How long?" "They've been in contact 40 seconds. At this pressure level," Torres did the math. 15 minutes, sir, maybe a little more. They're burning through ammunition at this rate in..." He stopped. "Torres," Caldwell said. "Sir." Torres's voice changed again. A different register from the previous changes. This one was something Maya hadn't heard from him before. "Sir, I have a signal. Long range. Not the relay station. Primary QRF band." The command post went quiet. "Verify it," Caldwell said. "Verifying." Torres's hands moved fast. He was cross-referencing the signal against the authentication protocols, checking the frequency pairs, running the trace he'd run on the previous transmission, but running it faster, running it better. Because Torres had made a mistake the first time, and Torres was the kind of person who did not make the same mistake twice. His eyes moved across the screens. "Sir, it's clean. It's genuinely clean. This is Iron Bridge. The first one was..." He stopped, swallowed. "The first one was a spoof. This is the real QRF. Where are they?" Torres read the position data. His face changed. "Sir," he said carefully, "they're not 4 hours out." Caldwell looked at him. "They've been moving under communications silence since they received the original distress call," Torres said. "Standard protocol for approaching a compromised zone. They didn't transmit until they were close enough to authenticate." He looked up from the screen. "Sir, they're 40 minutes out. They've been 40 minutes out for the last hour. Someone sent us the spoofed 4-hour transmission specifically to make us calculate the wrong gap." The room processed this. 40 minutes. Not 4 hours. 40 minutes, which meant the gap between the current wall engagement and the arrival of the QRF was not 45 minutes. It was whatever was left of 40 minutes. Caldwell pressed the radio. "Iron Bridge, this is Raven Ridge Actual. We are in active contact on the eastern wall. Request your best possible timeline. Over." The response came back on primary band, clean and immediate. Raven Ridge Iron Bridge. We have a rotary wing on approach. ETA to your position is 38 minutes. We also have a secondary element moving by ground. ETA 45. We are going to be there. Raven Ridge. Hold your wall. Out. 38 minutes. The eastern wall had been in contact for 3 minutes. They needed to hold for 35 more. Caldwell turned to the command post. Every face was looking at him. Torres. Holt at his communication station. The 2 soldiers on perimeter monitoring. Every face carrying the specific weight of people who have been in a confined space together for 53 hours and have run out of reserves they didn't know they had and are now being asked to find more. He looked at all of them. 35 minutes, he said. That is all we need. 35 minutes and this is over. He said it the way he had said things throughout his career, not as reassurance, but as information. He was a commander who believed that the people under his command deserved to be told the truth and trusted to handle it. Torres, he said, relay the QRF position data to every station on the eastern wall. I want those soldiers to know exactly how long they're holding for. He turned. Where is Maya? Oh. Maya was in the medical area. Not willingly. Okafor had walked her there the way you walk someone somewhere when you're not asking permission, by simply going there and being difficult to separate from, and by using the specific social leverage of someone who has just taken a bullet on your behalf. The medic was a staff sergeant named Calloway, 38 years old, who looked at Okafor's shoulder and Maya's arm with the equanimity of someone who had been dealing with self-neglected combat injuries for 15 years and had stopped feeling surprised by them. You first, she said to Okafor. Her first, Okafor said. He has an exit wound, Maya said. You have a possible fracture, Okafor said. Calloway looked between them. I am going to need you both to stop making decisions in my medical space, she said in the voice of a woman who had earned the right to that sentence. And I am going to start with whoever I assess as most critical. She assessed both of them in about 12 seconds. Started with Maya's arm. Maya sat on the field cot and let Calloway work without commenting on what Calloway was doing, which she had learned early in her career was the most useful thing you could do in a medical situation, when you were the patient rather than the operator. From outside, muffled by the base walls, but audible, she could hear the engagement. It had been running for 8 minutes. It was still running. The eastern wall was still holding. Holt appeared at the door of the medical area. He looked at Maya, at Okafor. Iron Bridge is 31 minutes out, he said. He was keeping his voice neutral and mostly succeeding. Commander Caldwell sent me to tell you. Thank you, Ryan, Maya said. He nodded, started to leave, turned back. The wall is holding, he said. Like he needed them to know. Like the information would help. It did. We heard, Okafor said. Holt nodded again and left. Calloway finished with Maya's arm hairline fracture at the outer elbow, confirmed immobilized as much pain management as the field kit allowed, which was not much, but was something, and moved to Okafor's shoulder. Okafor sat entirely still throughout the process, with the particular stillness of a man who has made peace with discomfort as an operating condition. Maya watched him. I need to say something to you, she said. You don't, he said. I'm going to anyway. He looked at her. You went back, she said. When those 6 fighters were between us and the wire, you didn't hesitate. Neither did you, he said. You kept running when I told you to. That's the harder thing. She held his gaze. I don't know that it is. I do, he said simply. Calloway made a sound that was not quite a word, the sound of a person carefully not participating in a conversation that was happening over her patient's shoulder. Maya looked at the wall. At nothing particular. At the specific texture of the moment, which was alive, functional 30 minutes from the end of this, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and field equipment, and the unmistakable presence of people who had just survived something they weren't certain they would. Hale would have had something to say about all of this, she said. Not quite to Okafor, not quite to herself. Your instructor, yes, she paused. He would have framed it as a lesson. He always framed everything as a lesson. It was profoundly annoying and entirely effective. Okafor's mouth twitched. What would the lesson be? She thought about it. Really thought about it the way she thought about things when the tactical calculation was off and the actual thinking could come forward. That you can't protect people from a distance forever, she said slowly. At some point the distance closes, and what you find out when it closes is whether you've been protecting them because of what you need or because of what they need. She paused. Those are different things. Okafor considered this. And which was it for you? Tonight. She looked at him. Both, she said. At the beginning. By the end. She stopped. By the end, it was them, he said. She nodded. He nodded. Outside, the engagement was still running. The radio crackled at the 12-minute mark of the wall engagement. It was Marsh. He was on the eastern wall. He had gone there directly after they came back through the wire without checking in, without asking permission, had simply appeared at the wall and taken a position and started doing what needed to be done, which was what Marsh did when he had stopped calculating and started acting. His voice on the radio was flat and tight, and had something behind it that Maya had not heard from him in their brief acquaintance. Not fear, not panic, something simpler and worse. Command, he said. I need you to know that Lieutenant Ferris is down. Non-fatal, but he is out of the fight. We have a gap at Sector 4. Torres relayed it to Caldwell instantly. Caldwell, can you cover Sector 4? Marsh covered, but we have a problem. A pause. Marsh never paused like that. Maya had noticed this about him in the time she'd known him. He stated things directly and moved forward. The pause meant he was deciding how to say something that didn't have a clean way to be said. They have a technical, Marsh said. Just moved up from the fallback route. Armed vehicle heavy caliber. If they bring it into firing position. He stopped. Our eastern wall is not rated for a technical. They will breach. Torres pulled up the thermal. There it was. The heat signature of an engine vehicle-sized moving along the base of the ridge toward the eastern approach. Time to firing position, Caldwell said. Torres ran it. 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Iron Bridge was 24 minutes out. 18-minute gap. With a technical in firing position, the eastern wall would not hold for 18 minutes. The command post did the math simultaneously and arrived at the same place simultaneously, and the silence that followed was the silence of people confronting arithmetic. They don't want to be true. Caldwell pressed the radio. He was calling Iron Bridge. Iron Bridge, this is Raven Ridge Actual. We have a vehicle threat eastern approach moving to firing position. Can you expedite over? The response took 11 seconds. Raven Ridge, we are pushing the rotary wing ahead. Best expedite ETA is 18 minutes. We are aware that is not sufficient. Can you neutralize the vehicle over? 18 minutes. The technical was operational in 6. Caldwell stood in the center of the command post. Torres was looking at him. Holt was looking at him. Every person in the room was looking at him with the specific expression of people waiting to see what the commander does when the math stops working. And then Maya walked through the door. She had her arm immobilized. She had Calloway's field wrap from wrist to mid-forearm. She was moving carefully in the specific way of someone who has made a calculation about what their body can and cannot do and has decided what to do with the results. She looked at Caldwell. He looked at her. Technical, she said. Eastern approach. Yes, I heard Marsh on the radio. She moved to the tactical map. She looked at the vehicle's projected trajectory and its projected firing position. She looked at the terrain between the firing position and her own location. She looked at the distances with an expression that Torres would later describe as the expression of someone doing arithmetic they are not happy about. I have one option, she said. Your rifle is empty, Caldwell said. There is one viable angle, she continued as though he hadn't spoken. From the southeastern corner of the base, the engine block of that vehicle will be exposed for approximately 40 seconds as it rounds the terrain feature to reach the firing position. One shot. Engine block. She looked at him. Disable the vehicle, not the crew. Disable it, and it becomes an obstacle rather than a threat. Karimi's fighters cannot push a disabled technical into position in the time available to them. Your rifle is empty, Caldwell said again. My rifle is empty, she confirmed. Torres has a marksman rifle in the equipment locker. I saw it when you opened the inventory last night. Torres looked at the locker, looked at Caldwell. It's not calibrated to her, Caldwell said. No, she agreed. Give me 10 minutes with it and it will be calibrated. We have 6 minutes before the technical reaches firing position. Then give me 6 minutes, she said. And a spotter, someone who can call the wind from the southeastern corner. She looked at Torres. You. Torres blinked. You've been reading this weather pattern for 52 hours, she said. You know the wind shifts on this ridge better than anyone in this building. I need that. Not a rifle, not cover fire, just the wind. Torres looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at Maya. He looked at her left arm, at the field wrap, at the way she was holding her shoulder slightly compensated to take the arm out of the load chain. He looked at the tactical map, at the distance to the southeastern corner, at the vehicle's projected trajectory on Torres's thermal screen. He thought about 30 years of command decisions. He thought about the 3 grease pencil marks she had made when she first walked into this command post. He thought about 86 people. Go, he said. Maya was already moving. Torres was on his feet before the word finished. At the southeastern corner, Maya set up in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Torres was beside her watching the wind indicators he'd improvised from a piece of fabric tied to the barrier, because Torres had been reading this weather for 52 hours, and knew that this corner of the base had its own micro-pattern, a channeling effect from the terrain to the east that made the primary wind indicator unreliable by 3 to 5 degrees at distance. He had noticed this on day 1. He had told no one because he was a communications sergeant and wind patterns at firing positions were not his assigned expertise, and he had not understood until this moment that the piece of information he had filed as interesting but irrelevant was precisely the piece of information that determined whether this shot was possible. The channel effect runs northeast to southeast, he said. At 140 meters, the engine block distance, it adds about a 5-degree lateral drift that doesn't show on the primary indicator. Maya set up behind the marksman rifle. Familiar weight. Different balance than hers. Not worse different. She was already adjusting. You certain? She said. No, Torres said. She looked at him. I'm certain about the data, he said. I'm not certain about my interpretation. I've never done this before. She looked at him for 1 second. You've been doing this for 52 hours, she said. You have been the most accurate source of information in this base since I arrived. Trust it. Torres looked at the fabric strip, at the terrain, at his own memory of the patterns he'd been watching for 2 straight days. 5-degree northeast compensation, he said. I trust it. Maya turned back to the scope. The vehicle came around the terrain feature at 0629. She saw it, found the engine block, 40 seconds of exposure. She had 1 shot. Her left arm was immobilized. She was using a rifle that was not hers. She was compensating for a wind pattern she had learned about 47 seconds ago from a soldier whose primary job was radio communications. She heard Hale. Not the memory of his voice, something cleaner than that. The actual quality of what he had taught her, distilled down to its essential element. Present the way a fundamental truth is present when you've stopped arguing with it. A sniper is defined not by the targets they eliminate. They are defined by the lives they protect. She found the exhale. She fired. The vehicle engine died at 0629 and 14 seconds. It coasted to a stop 40 meters short of its firing position. On the radio, Marsh's voice, "The technical is stopped. It's stopped. Sir, the technical is stopped." Caldwell's voice came back low and deliberate. 30 minutes to Iron Bridge. Hold the wall. Torres beside Maya was looking at the stopped vehicle through his own optics. He was shaking, not from fear, from the release of something that had been held at maximum compression for a very long time. "That was my data," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "That was your data," Maya said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Two people on a southeastern corner of a besieged base in northern Afghanistan at dawn, sharing the specific knowledge that the chain of events leading to this moment ran through both of them without being reducible to either of them alone. Torres wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a breath. "You're welcome," he said. Maya's mouth moved into something that was fully a smile, the first one Torres had seen from her. "Thank you, Torres," she said, and she meant it the whole way down. The rotary wing came in at 0657. Torres heard it first, not on the radio, but through the walls of the command post, the specific vibration frequency of a military helicopter at approach speed that a person learns to recognize after enough time in places where that sound means something. He said nothing. He just looked up from his screens, and his face changed in a way that didn't require words. Caldwell heard it 8 seconds later. He pressed the radio. "All stations, this is Raven Ridge Actual. Iron Bridge is on approach. Maintain your positions until I give the all clear. Do not break sector. We are 30 seconds from confirmed rescue." He paused. "You held. All of you. You held." He released the radio. He stood in the center of the command post and let himself feel what he had not permitted himself to feel for 53 hours. Not relief, not yet relief required confirmation, and confirmation required the helicopter on the ground and the QRF through the wire. But something adjacent to relief. The first loosening of the thing that had been pulled tight in his chest since the moment he'd understood 2 days ago that the rescue mission had walked into a trap and that Fort Raven Ridge was going to have to survive on what it had until someone reached them, what it had. What it had turned out to include was a woman with a battered rifle case who knocked on the blast door and said, "Your medics have 4 hours before they're the first ones to die." He thought about that sentence, about the version of himself that had existed before he heard it, the version that had almost not opened the door, that had cataloged the situation as ghost story, that had laughed. He did not feel embarrassed about the laugh. He felt something more complicated. The specific kind of accounting that a person does when they realize the framework they were using to evaluate something was inadequate, and that the inadequacy was not stupidity, but a gap in experience they hadn't known they had. He had never met anyone like Maya Cross. He was not certain anyone else was. The helicopter cleared the perimeter. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos of the particular kind that follows a sustained military engagement. A choreography of landing zones and personnel accountability and medical assessment and weapons clearing, and the 100 operational details that stood between a besieged base and a properly secured extraction site. Iron Bridge brought 12 Rangers and 2 medics, and enough ammunition to have fought the engagement 3 times over, which was the kind of thing that made soldiers laugh with a quality of laughter that was not entirely about humor. The ground element arrived 11 minutes after the helicopter, coming through the northern approach in 3 vehicles that Sergeant Derek Okafor, sitting in the medical area with his shoulder wrapped and his arm in a temporary sling, heard and identified by engine sound before anyone told him they were there. He stood up. Calloway said, "Sit down, Sergeant." He sat back down. Through the wall, through the voices and the radio traffic and the sound of the base transitioning from combat posture to recovery posture, he could hear the specific quality of 86 people understanding simultaneously that they were going to make it. It was not a sound that could be described efficiently. It was too layered for that too much relief and exhaustion, and the particular grief that comes after survival when you start to account for what the survival cost. He heard it all, and he sat in the medical area. And he thought about Maya Cross, putting herself between Karimi's assault and the people inside these walls, with one working arm and a sidearm and grenades, and the specific calm of a person who has decided very clearly what they are there for. She had told him by the end it was them. He believed her. He also believed it had always been them, and that the part she described as "at the beginning both" was her being honest about the complexity of what drove her, rather than a confession that her motivation was ever impure. He had met people who did this work for the wrong reasons. He knew what that looked like. That was not what Maya Cross looked like. He was thinking about how to say that to her, whether to say it at all, or whether it was the kind of thing that didn't need saying because she already knew it when she appeared in the doorway of the medical area. She had her immobilized arm against her body, and she was looking at him with the same patient, direct attention she had given everything since she arrived. "Ironbridge is through the wire," she said. "I heard," he said. She came in and sat on the field cot across from him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who had been outside the wire together at 0:30, with a 40-man assault force between them and safety. "Your shoulder," she said. "Calloway says 6 to 8 weeks, he said. Yours? Similar. The fracture is minor." She paused. "I'll be functional in 4. He almost said, "Of course you will." He stopped himself because it would have sounded like flattery, and she did not want flattery, and more than that, it wasn't accurate. It wasn't that she healed faster. It was that she had a different tolerance for the gap between functional and fully recovered, a different calculus about what her body owed her versus what she owed the work. He understood that now. He wasn't certain it was healthy. He was certain it was her. "There's going to be a debrief," he said. "I know. A long one. Multiple agencies. What you did out here?" He paused. "They're going to want everything. Every detail of the 6 days before you came in. The enemy positions Hadid Karimi, the spoofed transmission. All of it." "I know," she said again. "Are you going to stay for it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. He hadn't been certain of her answer. "I have information they need," she said. "And this time—" She stopped. Started again more carefully. "This time, I'm not leaving because the aftermath is uncomfortable. I'm going to stay through the whole thing." Okafor heard what she wasn't saying. He had been listening to what Maya Cross wasn't saying since 3 in the morning, and he had gotten reasonably good at it. "Good," he said. She nodded. She looked at her immobilized arm. At the field wrap Calloway had applied with the crisp efficiency of someone who had done this many times, and would do it many more. "I need to make a phone call," she said, "when the communications are stable." "Hale." She looked at him. "How did you know about Hale?" "You mentioned him," he said. "Twice. Both times when you were working through something that mattered to you." He met her gaze. "He seems like someone you should call." She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked at the wall. "He's been sick," she said quietly. "On and off for 2 years. He doesn't tell me the details because he knows I'll try to manage the information instead of just hearing it." A pause. "He's probably been awake all night." "Then call him," Okafor said. She nodded. She stood up slowly, in the careful way of someone whose body has accumulated a significant list of grievances over the past 6 hours and is presenting them all at once, now that the adrenaline was stepping back. She walked to the door. Stopped. "Okafor," she said. "Ma'am." "Lucas," she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Thank you for holding the rifle." He looked at her. "And for holding the position," she said. "And for every other thing." He had nothing that was the right size for that sentence, so he said, "Any time." She walked out. She found Caldwell outside the command post. He was standing with the Iron Bridge commander, a colonel named Whitfield, who had the bearing of a man who had been doing this for a long time and was not easily impressed. They were deep in an operational handoff, the steady, dense exchange of information that marks the transition from one command structure to another. Caldwell was talking fast, and Whitfield was listening and writing and asking sharp questions, and Caldwell was answering them sharply back. Maya stood to the side and waited. Caldwell noticed her within 30 seconds. He held up a hand to Whitfield, hold on, and turned. "Status," he said. "Functional," she said. "Medically evaluated. Arm is fracture, not break. Okafor's shoulder is a through and through. He'll be fine. I know, Caldwell said. I have Calloway's report. He looked at her with the expression she had been seeing from him with increasing frequency over the last several hours, the look of someone who keeps encountering a reality that doesn't fit their previous model and keeps having to update the model. What do you need? Communications access, she said. Personal call, 5 minutes. Torres will set it up. He paused. Hale. She looked at him. You mentioned him, Caldwell said. Last night, in the command post. He kept his voice neutral. He sounds like someone who would want to know you're intact. She nodded. He would. Caldwell held her gaze for a moment. The debrief starts in 3 hours. Whitfield needs everything you have on the 6-day surveillance. He's already asked about you twice. I'll be there. Maya. He said it the way she had said Okafor's name, the first name quality of it deliberate. She looked at him. I'm going to be recommending you for commendation, formal recognition through the proper channels. She started to say something. I know, he said before she could. I know you're going to tell me you don't want it. I know you're going to tell me this was just the work, and the work doesn't need a ceremony. He held her gaze. But there are 86 people in this base, and 3 days from now, they are going to be home with the people who love them, and I need them to be able to tell the true story of what happened here. Not a version that leaves you out because you preferred to be left out. He paused. You don't have to attend the ceremony, but you don't get to disappear from the record. She stood there. Caldwell did not fill the silence. He had learned in the last 12 hours that with Maya Cross, you did not fill the silence. You let it do its work. All right, she said finally. He nodded, turned back to Whitfield. Maya walked toward the communication station. Hale picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had known or suspected or felt the specific thing he sometimes said he felt when she was in something serious, the thing she had always been skeptical of because she was not a person who believed in the sentimental versions of human intuition. She was skeptical of it less than she used to be. You're alive, he said. His voice was the same. That was the first thing she checked for every time she called him after an operation. The voice. It had changed over the 2 years of his illness, more effort behind it, a different quality to the breath underneath the words. She tracked those changes the way she tracked wind patterns, with precision and with things she could not calculate. I'm alive, she said. A short silence. The silence of someone who has been carrying a weight for several hours and is now setting it down with the careful attention it deserves. Tell me, he said. She told him. Not the tactical version he would get that eventually through channels or through her in more detail later. She told him the version that mattered right now. The weight on the ridge before the first shot. The moment she asked Okafor to hold the rifle. The 40 meters outside the wire with one arm. Torres and the wind data, and the technical and the second-to-last thing she thought before she fired. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he did better than almost anyone she had ever known. When she finished, there was a silence that was different from the operational silences she had been navigating for the past day. Softer. The silence of someone who is moved and is not performing being moved. You called the wind yourself, he said. Torres called the wind, she said. I told him to trust his data. Which is the same thing, Hale said. She thought about that. Maybe. It's the same thing, he said again firmly. Hale, when he was certain, was completely certain. You've been calling other people's wind for years, Maya. You just didn't know that's what you were doing. She stood there with the radio handset against her ear in a communications alcove at Fort Raven Ridge. As dawn became full morning, and somewhere outside, she could hear the specific sound of a base transitioning from emergency to recovery from fear to something that would eventually become relief, and then eventually become memory. I need to tell you something, she said. You don't have to, he said. Kandahar, she said. A longer silence. I know, he said. You've always known, she said. It was not a question. I've known the shape of it. he said carefully. I didn't know the details. I didn't push for the details because they were yours to carry in your own way. But yes, the shape of it, yes. She closed her eyes, opened them. It was a wrong call on bad intelligence, she said. I've told myself that for 8 years. It's accurate. It's also... She stopped. It's also not enough. It was accurate and it was not enough, and I think I needed both of those things to be true at the same time, and I couldn't hold them both until... She paused. Until last night. What happened last night? He said gently. I asked for help, she said. And it worked. Another silence. This one had a quality she hadn't heard from him in a while. Full. Complete. The silence of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing for a long time and has just heard it. Good, he said. Just that. Good. The way he always distilled things. She had spent years finding it reductive. Standing in the communications alcove at 0730 with a fractured elbow, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has run a very long race on reserves they didn't know they had, she found it exactly right. How are you? She said. And I mean actually. A beat. Stable, he said. Current treatment is working adequately. My doctor uses the word managing, and I have learned to find that word acceptable. Hail. I'm here, Maya, he said, not dismissively, with the specific weight of someone who knows the difference between I'm fine and I'm here and is choosing the more accurate one. I'm here. That's real. Come see me when you're stateside. I will, she said. You've said that before, he said. I'll be there in 2 weeks, she said. Coronado. I'll bring food. A pause. Then quietly, I'll make coffee. She pressed her hand flat against the wall of the alcove. At nothing, just the wall. The solid present real fact of a wall under her palm, in a building that was standing because of what had happened in the last 12 hours. Richard, she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name in the call. Maybe in years. Yes, he said. Thank you for sending me here. He didn't say I didn't send you. They both knew the story of how she'd arrived at this base had its real beginning in his kitchen in Coronado, in the conversation she hadn't finished, in the 5 words he'd said, that she'd driven home with, and turned over, and eventually, slowly, in the months afterward, actually heard. Thank you for going, he said. The debrief took 4 hours. Whitfield was thorough and professional and asked precise questions, and Maya answered all of them with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. She laid out the 6 days of surveillance with the specificity of someone who had been tracking the information as something she might have to account for and had tracked it accordingly. Enemy positions, movement patterns, command structure, the rotation cycle on the northern slope, the 40-minute window, Hadid Karimi, the spoofed transmission. On the spoofed transmission, there was a significant pause from the assembled debrief team. A signals intelligence specialist named Captain Park, who had arrived with the Iron Bridge element and had been listening to the debrief with the focused attention of someone building a case in real time, looked up from his notes. You're saying someone with access to our QRF communication protocols and frequency architecture sent us a transmission designed to make us believe rescue was 4 hours out when it was actually 40 minutes away? Yes, Maya said. That requires internal access, Park said. Protocol-level knowledge that doesn't come from signals interception alone. Yes, she said. That means there is an intelligence problem inside your regional command structure, Maya said. Someone gave Karimi the frequency pairs, the authentication protocols, and the relay station access codes. That's not battlefield acquisition. That's a source. She looked at him evenly. I've been aware of the possibility since day 3 of surveillance. The attack on this base was too well prepared for the available information about this base. The rescue mission that brought these soldiers here was known before it happened. That doesn't happen without a source. The room got very quiet. Whitfield looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at Maya. You've had this assessment since day 3, Whitfield said carefully. Yes. And you didn't relay it. I had no secure channel, and no confirmed recipient, she said. Relaying an unconfirmed assessment of a potential intelligence compromise through unsecured channels to an unknown destination seemed likely to make the problem worse, not better. She held Whitfield's gaze. So I held it and continued the mission. Whitfield said nothing for a long moment. Park was writing fast. "This is going to go significantly above my level," Whitfield said. "I know," Maya said. "I have the complete surveillance record from all 6 days. Locations, timings, observed communications behavior, the relay station traffic pattern that Torres identified. All of it." She looked at Torres, who was sitting 2 seats down, and had been contributing his own section of the debrief with the growing confidence of someone who is discovering in real time that the work they did was more important than they knew. Torres caught the discrepancy in real time. "I'd start there." Torres looked at the table, then at Whitfield. "I can walk you through the signal analysis," Torres said. "I kept detailed logs." Of course he had. Whitfield nodded slowly. "We're going to need those logs. And your complete surveillance record, Maya. Everything." He paused. "This is going to take considerably longer than 4 hours." "I know," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." It was Marsh who found her afterward. Not the Marsh from the first 12 hours, the one with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his West Point training organized as a defense against uncertainty. A different Marsh. The one who had gone outside the wire and come back in through the access point alongside Okafor and Reyes and Tao and Maya, and had stood at the eastern wall through the engagement, and had been there for the stopped technical, and had delivered the flat, accurate report about the gap in Sector 4, with the straightforwardness of a man who had stopped performing steadiness and achieved it. He found her outside the command post in the mid-morning quiet, sitting on a piece of equipment casing with her immobilized arm in her lap and a cup of coffee she was actually drinking. He sat down without asking. She didn't indicate that was a problem. For a moment, they just existed in the same space. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You don't," she said. "I questioned your assessment when you came in," he said. "In the command post. I pushed back on Commander Caldwell's decision to trust you." "You were right to," she said. He turned to look at her. "I was an unknown quantity in a critical situation. Demanding verification was the correct response. The problem was only in the tone." He looked at her for a moment. "The tone," he said. "You questioned the information," she said. "That's good command practice. You also assumed the information was wrong because of where it was coming from." She looked at him steadily. "Those are different things." He held her gaze. The specific expression of a man accepting something he would rather debate but has decided not to. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said. Something moved in his face, almost a smile. "You don't make it easy to apologize." "I'm not trying to make it hard," she said. "I'm trying to tell you that the part that needs to be different going forward is not whether you verify information. It's what you're actually verifying." She paused. "Verify the information. That's the job. Don't verify it through the lens of who brought it." He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was actually receiving something rather than preparing a response. "I'll remember that," he said. She nodded. He started to stand. Stopped. Sat back down. "Outside the wire," he said. "When you told me to think about what I was there for instead of what I was afraid of." He looked at his hands. "I've been in combat before. I've told myself I wasn't afraid before. But that..." He stopped. "That was different. That actually worked." She looked at him. "Because it's true," she said simply. "Fear uses the same energy as focus. You can't eliminate it. You can redirect it." She paused. "What were you there for, when you redirected?" He thought about it, genuinely in the way she had recognized in him by then. Marsh, when he stopped performing certainty, was capable of real thinking. "Ferris," he said. Lieutenant Ferris, who had gone down at Sector 4. "He's 29. He has a kid he hasn't met yet. His wife gave birth 6 weeks ago. He showed me a photograph on day 1. He paused. I was there for Ferris making it home for that. Maya looked at him. That's exactly right, she said. He nodded. He stood up this time all the way. For what it's worth, he said, I'm going to tell that story. What you did here. I'm going to tell it accurately. Tell the whole story, she said. Torres, Okafor, Reyes, Tao, Holt on the radio, Calloway in the medical station, Caldwell holding the command posture for 53 hours without breaking. She looked at him. Tell all of it. He looked at her. Including you, he said. A pause. Including me, she said. Yay. Holt was the last one to find her before the extraction. She had expected him. She wasn't sure why. Something about the quality of his attention throughout the operation, the specific awareness of a young soldier who was processing a large experience, and knew he was processing it and was trying to do it correctly. He came to her with the photograph in his hand. He held it out. Emma, 17 years old, laughing. She could see even in the small photograph that Emma laughed freely the way Holt had described the kind of laugh that started before the punchline. Maya looked at the photograph, looked at Holt. She looks like you, she said. He looked surprised. People don't usually say that. The eyes, she said. And the way she's holding her shoulders, like she's about to say something. She handed the photograph back. She's going to be very happy to see you. He took the photograph carefully, put it back in his pocket, pressed his hand against it briefly. I wrote down what you said, he said. In the command post. About Emma laughing before the punchline. About that being who you were doing it for. She looked at him. I'm going to remember that, he said. However long I do this, I'm going to remember that the math isn't the point. The people the math is about are the point. He swallowed. I think that's what you were saying. That's exactly what I was saying, she said. He nodded. He straightened in the unconscious way of someone who has received something and is standing differently because of it. Thank you, he said, for all of it. She looked at Ryan Holt, 22 years old, 13 months in a photograph of his sister Emma in his left breast pocket, and she felt something she had not expected to feel at the end of this operation. Not the familiar post-mission flatness, the depressurization of coming down from sustained intensity. Something warmer, more specific. Something that felt like the right end of the right story. Go home, Ryan, she said, and give Emma a reason to laugh. He grinned. It transformed his face. She could see the resemblance to the photograph all at once, the same quality of light in it. He turned and walked back toward the extraction staging area. Caldwell found her one final time as the extraction was forming up. He walked up and stood beside her without preamble. They were past. Preamble had been past it for hours. Whitfield wants to keep you for the extended intelligence debrief, he said. Could be another week on site. I know, she said. I told him I'd stay. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he had learned to be quiet around her useful quiet, full quiet. I laughed, he said. She looked at him. When Bennett told me a woman was at the door, he said, I laughed. I want you to know that I know that, and that I know what it means about the framework I was using. She looked at him steadily. You opened the door, she said. Eventually. Before the window closed, she said. That matters. She paused. The laugh tells me something about where you started. The door tells me something about who you are. He looked at the ground, back at her. I've been trying to figure out how to write the commendation in a way that captures what actually happened here. The standard language doesn't... He stopped. It doesn't reach it. Use Torres's logs, she said. Use Okafor's debrief. Use Marsh's account of the wall engagement. Use Holt's communications record. She looked at him. The picture of what happened here is in all of those. My piece fits inside all of that. Write it that way. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not going to make this easy, he said. "I'm going to make it accurate," she said. "That's more useful." He held out his hand. She looked at it, took it. They shook the handshake of two people who have stood in a burning building together and come out on the other side with a specific understanding of each other that didn't exist in any formal language. "Maya Cross," he said. "Commander Caldwell," she said. He let go of her hand, turned back toward the extraction. She stayed where she was and watched 86 soldiers move toward the helicopters and the vehicles and the long transit back toward the forward operating base and the debrief chain and eventually for each of them toward home. She thought about Hale's kitchen, about the coffee that would be ready in 2 weeks, about Emma laughing before the punchline and Okafor holding absolutely still and Torres trusting his own wind data and Marsh standing at the eastern wall and Caldwell pressing his radio at 03-something and saying we are not alone on this fight anymore. She thought about Kandahar. She let herself think about it fully, the way she hadn't been able to for 8 years, without routing around it, without the management strategy, without the familiar architecture of controlled distance. She let it be what it was, a mistake made in 3 seconds on bad intelligence by a person doing her best in an impossible situation. A mistake that had cost something real. A mistake that was also not the whole of her, not the definition of her, not the sentence she was serving. She had been serving it anyway. She was done with that. The last helicopter lifted off the ground, and she watched it go, and she felt the weight behind her sternum settle into something she could identify clearly for the first time. Not guilt, not the sharp edge of it that had been there since Kandahar. Something older, something that had always been underneath the guilt waiting. Grief. Simple grief. The thing she had been carrying shame about when what she had actually needed to carry was sadness. She let herself carry it correctly. It was heavy. It was supposed to be heavy. The heaviness meant something real had happened, and that she had been present for it, and that she had mattered to it. That was not a burden. That was the price of doing work that mattered. She picked up her rifle case. She had a debrief to attend. She had logs to review and intelligence to document, and a week of detailed work ahead that would matter to people she would never meet in operations, she would never know about in the specific invisible way that good intelligence work mattered quietly, completely without ceremony. She had a phone call to make in 2 weeks. A kitchen in Coronado. Coffee. She had somewhere beyond these mountains whatever came next. She turned toward the command post. Maya Cross had not come to Fort Raven Ridge to be called a legend. She had not come for the commendation that Caldwell would write, or the debrief that Whitfield would run, or the story that Marsh would tell, or the memory that Holt would carry home to Emma in his left breast pocket. She had come because 86 people were surrounded, and she was the one person on Earth who understood exactly what was happening to them and exactly what it would take to stop it. She had done that. Every one of them was going home. That was not the beginning of her legend. That was her answer to the only question that had ever mattered when it counted. When the window was open and the cost was real and nobody was watching, what would she do? She had answered it. She would answer it again. That was who Maya Cross was, and nothing that had ever happened to her, and nothing that ever would, was going to change that.